The story begins with the story that if a tiger was born in an ordinary zoo, then he gets used to living in peace and quiet, which is not typical for the animal's wild habitat. Also, the tiger no longer needs to hunt for prey that could become its potential food, because it is not ready to be fed by an animal care worker. Then it is told that in order to awaken the natural instincts of the tiger, the zookeeper cut a duck and threw it in front of a predator. The tiger, in turn, smelled fresh blood, and this aroused in him the desire to eat and hunt. That same duck that day was torn into small pieces and eaten entirely by a predator. After that, it is said that due to its weakness and helplessness, the poor duck could not resist, and thereby help. And the main character, who was reborn in a different and completely different world at the age of 17, became like this very poor duck thrown to a ruthless tiger. It is shown how a young man rushes at the speed of light along a dark night street, which is illuminated only by the light of lanterns. The guy runs past the brick two-story houses, trying his best to break away from the person who is chasing him. The protagonist, whose name is Lord Lead, and he is the fourth son of Lord Yunyang of the Yongtian Kingdom, asks the pursuing man in a black mask and cloak to stop hunting him, to which he replies that he will stop only at the moment when the young man does not run away. The guy, much to his surprise, pursuing in a raincoat, stops abruptly and turns his whole body towards that person. He says in a rather loud voice that this is the persecution, and the attack is already 120th time this year. Then the protagonist confidently asks if his older brother is not yet tired of hiring people to kill the younger. That man in the cloak and mask tells Lord Lead that the number of attacks does not matter. All these pursuits of the assassins on Lord Lead were not crowned with any success, so they are not going to stop in any case, exactly until they can complete their mission from the Elder. The protagonist first in response tells the pursuer that he is right, and then decides to ask that it is okay for a man to be a dog to capture Lord Lead. The man in the cloak and mask was sweating a lot and out of breath, but he confidently tells the young man not to talk nonsense, and not to talk any nonsense. He swears his true loyalty to Lord Lai. At this moment, the main character, Lord Lead, took over the initiative of conducting a monologue, starting to say that the four brothers of a man in a black cloak said exactly the same words, but now, unlike him, they are eating watermelons in the main character's house. The man who previously stalked Lord Lead asks with a grin that the protagonist really thinks that he can lure a man with mere watermelons. He continues to press on, asking if the protagonist really thinks it's so easy for him to stalk a young man for such a long time. Now they are standing a meter from each other, one of which shows not a decent and not cultural gesture with his hand, showing the middle finger, and the second pointing his finger at the person standing opposite. The first is the pursuing man, and the second, respectively, is Lord Lead. At this time, a sharp sword appears right at the neck of a man in a mask and cloak. The man in the black cloak tenses up and lowers his yellow eyes to the sharp weapon. The person who brought a sharp sword to the throat of the pursuer turns out to be a young girl named Alia, and she is the only knight of the protagonist. The blonde, who looks belligerent because of the blue armor, apologizes to her master Lita and says that she did not have time to arrive in time, thereby being late and let him down. The protagonist crosses both arms on his chest and asks her not to worry, as he almost managed to cope on his own, without anyone's help. The young man smiles triumphantly, as he understands that now the pursuer in the black cloak is not going anywhere. At this time, the blonde notices something is wrong, because of which she loudly shouts to her master to be careful, trying to warn and save. She even stretched her whole body forward to protect if anything. But Lord Lead, as expected in principle, did not have time to react properly, but only widened his eyes. A whole bucket of water was poured on the main character by disgruntled tenants of the house, next to which the whole trinity stood, namely Lord Lead, the blonde Alia, and the pursuer in black robes. The man who poured out the bucket of water began to lament angrily that the youth was again screaming at night right under his windows. The stony-faced tenant added that he had said many times not to do this, in order not to interfere with those who actually live here. Lord Lead stood completely drenched with wet hair and clothes, which caused Alia to giggle while covering her smiling mouth, hand clenched into a fist. To this action, the girl heard the displeased exclamation of the young man, who ordered to stop laughing in vain. Further events take place after some small amount of time, when Lord Lead returned home. The main character was lying in a hot, spacious bath, the water temperature of which was very high and relieved fatigue and tension in the body from today. Lord Lead sighed wearily and said in a low voice that they could not continue like this any longer. At this time, the blonde Alia appeared behind the protagonist, whose body was wrapped in a white towel, and she herself held several of the same in her hands. The girl proudly announced that all the assassins were now completely eliminated, and then asked her young master if he would have any other orders. To all this, the young man in a quiet and tired voice asked the blonde to come closer to him so that he would say something to her. She was a little embarrassed, but hurried to stand next to him. While Alia was walking towards the main character, the guy asked the girl if she remembers the story about the tiger in the zoo that he told her earlier. The girl confidently agreed, to which the young man continued his story. The protagonist began to talk about the fact that at first he thought to spend all his days leisurely, doing nothing special at all. Lord Lead raised his hands and began to lather his head with massage movements. He closed his eyes and went on to say that he just thought that at the moment there are many different people who have managed to travel to other worlds that are similar to this. Then the protagonist opened his sad purple eyes and said that some of these human travelers have already conquered those worlds and become rulers, while others have become great strong cultivators. Lord Lead said that there are those who have become real heroes by trying to save the head of the demon kings. At that moment, the blonde knelt down near the head of the protagonist and burst a small soap bubble flying past. Alia listened attentively to her master's stories, but still failed to catch the main point. She asked him what he was thinking. The protagonist was frightened by someone else's presence, thinking that he did not voice his thoughts. He playfully coughed, putting his right hand, clenched into a fist, to his mouth, and then began to tell the blonde that when he thinks of his father as the lord of the state, he immediately closes his eyes to all those bad deeds that he does his older brother. Alia begins to draw water from the bath with a wooden ladle, and then pour water on the soapy head of her master, who goes on to say that his father made it clear that he wanted to give his post to Lord Lead's older brother, and the protagonist himself is just a small step for achieving this goal. Lord Lead remarked aloud that his older brother was too kind to be a good lord, and then said that he should be a lot tougher with everyone around him. The guy suggests that it was for these motives that his own father chose Lord Lead as a sacrifice of a duck to a tiger from a zoo. At this moment, Lord Lead's gaze becomes much sharper and more serious, as if the main character is about to voice his terrible plan for revenge. He expresses his idea aloud that the only true way out of this current situation is to receive an inheritance, in whatever form for himself, and leave this place, and the state as a whole. Lord Lead raises his head and looks at Alia looming over him, who was still sitting on her knees, but leaned a little more towards her master, because he almost whispered that he did not want to be a duck sacrifice, and also die at such a young age. The blonde thought to herself that wherever her young master expressed a desire to go, she would follow him, both into fire and into water. It was in this way that Lord Lead left the State of Union and began a completely new life for the benefit of himself and the salvation of his short life. The events of the first chapter begin outside the territory of the state of Yongxin. Through the forest, far away in the mountains, several horses are pulling a wooden cart behind them. In it, Lord Lead and the blonde Alia were located by the window. The girl smiles sweetly and asks her master why he is so happy. The young man tightly hugs a wooden chest with both hands, while resting his head on top of it. The main character chuckles softly and answers the girl that now they are very rich. Lord Lead opens a wooden chest and looks at the many gold coins it contains. The guy says that this money is the key to a successful and prosperous future. Recent memories burst into the head of the protagonist at this time, in which his father sternly scolded the young man, sitting on his throne, and behind him stood two older brothers and a little sister. The father issued the verdict, saying that he, as the king of Yongxin, no longer wants to see this dirty kid on his own lands. By dirty kid he meant Lord Lida, who at that moment was thinking that he did not expect his trick to work so easily and simply. It turns out that the main character had a plan in advance, in which Lord Lead made an honest exchange with his older unscrupulous brother. As a result of all this, the young man received his own feudal land and, in addition, a bunch of gold coins. The protagonist returned to reality, smiled and raised a wooden chest with money high above his head. But after that, the guy squatted down, again hugged the forged box and whimpered woefully, like a small child. Lord Lead began to echo that he knew that it would be easy, but what did the young man do in order to offend everyone so much? At this time, the blonde girl butted in, telling her young master that they were heading to the western city of Yuxi, which he had received as his own feudal territory. The young man turned his head to the girl with interest, listening to her words. Then Alia added that the place is widely known for its poverty and misery. For some reason, this question lifted the mood of the protagonist, so that he grinned happily. The young man suddenly said that the girl was actually so cute. She was very embarrassed by such a compliment and asked in surprise. Lord Lead asked the blonde a rhetorical counter-question that she really thought the guy would really let his father the king send him to a place where he couldn't survive. The protagonist placed the chest, which looked like a large box with a hinged lid and a lock for storing things, with gold coins on the floor, and asked Alia to listen carefully to what he was about to say. The young man began his narrative with elements of a monologue from the fact that the poor city of Yuxi is surrounded from the north by the territory of Jeochen, from the south by the territory of Yunhai, from the east by the territory of Yunnan, and from the west by the territory of demons. The blonde widened her eyes in surprise and asked what was next. The protagonist took a step towards the girl, patted her fair head, and told her that the reason the area is called Yuxi Western City is because it is the first line of defense against demons in the west. The young man stood there, holding his hand on the blonde's head. The protagonist continued to say while smiling slyly that, based on the above reason, few people and tourists come to this poor city, and also no one dares to rule it. Lord Lead says that if he got a rich and prosperous city, then his older brothers could easily capture it in a matter of minutes, or even seconds. Lord Lead said that the western city of Yuxi was subjected to all sorts of attacks and wars from demons throughout this year. But the young man did not understand why then all the inhabitants of the city did not flee to a much safer place, because people are always forced to run away in such situations as far as possible. The blonde said that, according to her own investigation, only a few people in the western city of Yuxi had fled to other places and cities. The protagonist turned his head, pulled back the curtain with one hand, and looked out the window, behind which a beautiful landscape opened up. To the blonde's remark, Lord Lead quietly replied that, of course, he would like to find out much more information about this case. Then a mysterious girl was shown bathing in the lake. She had long blonde blue hair, but the girl's face could not be seen. It was definitely some mysterious person. Further events again returned to the main character. The young man was still sitting at the window, and suddenly his eyes widened quite sharply in surprise. It is obvious that the guy has come up with something, or understood. The blonde nodded, and suggested that these protectors could be local officials who did a good job for the good of their people. At the same time, the girl tilted her head slightly to the side, to her shoulder. The protagonist winked at Alia and said that the answers to all those of interest and questions they will know as soon as they get to the westernmost city of Yuxi. The young man added at the end that he did not think that the guards of the people were actually local officials. After that, the wooden wagon continued on its way through green meadows and fields, as well as through a broad-leaved forest with many branched trees. Further events are transferred at the moment when the guy and the girl have successfully reached and are now leisurely exploring the streets of a poor city. The blonde cautiously calls her young master by name, as she puts it out due to the attention of people. Despite the fact that this is the central and main street of Yuxi, you can't really say that from it. People who walk down the street are dressed in torn clothes with a lot of closed patches. They carefully examine Lord Lead and Alia from head to toe, who, compared to the rest, are dressed in expensive and clean fabrics. The main character tells the blonde aloud that, although he morally set himself up for such shots, the reality turned out to be much worse and tougher. Many people walking along the street of the poor western town of Yuxi are carrying baskets of fruit and pastries, which, as Lord Lead noted with horror and shock, are wild and musty. The houses that stand around the perimeter are badly collapsed and destroyed. Somewhere the roof is broken, somewhere the plaster is falling off. The protagonist once again examined everything around and asked if these frail huts were not blown away by a light wind. The protagonist squatted down and declared that this western city of Yuxi is much worse than an abandoned garbage dump, and then resolutely said that he wanted to immediately return home to Yongshan in order to ask his father the king for forgiveness. The girl was dressed in a snow-white shirt with a brooch at the very throat under a blue skirt with a brown belt and dark tights. In one hand she held a long sword in a blue scabbard. The blonde asked her master to look around, saying that the people of Yuxi Western City seemed quite cheerful. The main character stopped shedding bitter tears from disappointment and listened to the girl. The young man raised his head and carefully looked around with his bright purple eyes. Lord Lead noticed that all the people really seemed to be encouraged, as everyone had a bright smile on their faces. The blonde assumed that this was the case due to the arrival of her young master, but the main character objected, saying that he did not think so. At this time, an adult stranger stopped right in front of the young man, who said out loud that Mr. Lead himself was standing in front of him. He complimented the young man that he was indeed very young, as everyone said. The protagonist turned to this man and asked about who he was and what role he played. The man introduced himself as Lord Lead's new subordinate, and said his name was Pierce. This unusual and strange man was overweight, and he was also wearing clothes with patches. The man hurried to say that he had heard earlier that Mr. Lead had already arrived, and that they had all been waiting for him for a long time. He also said that he would immediately ask to set the table, and hoped that the new owner of the city would not be so disgusted with him to eat. At the end, he slyly laughed, while folding both hands on his chest. The protagonist narrowed his purple eyes a little, frowned a little, and thought deeply about this man's name and appearance. Lord Lead thought to himself that compared to the rest of the frail and thin people, this man looks rather fat and prosperous. The young man also noticed that the clothes of this subordinate did not match his appearance. The guy smirked slyly. It seemed that he had come up with some kind of cunning plan for the future. Immediately after this, Lord Lead asked Mr. Pierce to show the way to the new house of the protagonist. Mr. Pierce entered the grounds, standing on the tiled path leading to the entrance, and extended his hand towards the mansion, saying welcome. The main character hurried to enter, followed by a blonde, and said that the mansion looked quite rich. Mr. Pierce replied that Mr. Lead should not be so surprised, because the young man simply did not have time to see the entire poor city of Yuxi. He added that although this place looks rich, they lack everything exactly like the rest of the people. From the main character, who stood with a stony expression, a counter question followed, about why, then, Mr. Pierce himself is so fat. This greatly embarrassed the man, that his complexion turned blue. Now it is better to see that he has a completely bald voice, but there is a small thin mustache, and a strangely shaped beard. Mr. Pierce tried to explain himself, but he couldn't get a word out. The main character did not pull, so he asked to forget about it question and just go inside the mansion, as the young man was hungry. After that, all three, namely Mr. Pierce, Lord Lead and the blonde Alia, went to the entrance to the building. After a while, Mr. Pierce was standing near the dining table, carefully pouring red wine into a glass for himself. The protagonist and Alia were already sitting at the set table side by side to each other. The young man was already sitting in a black shirt and holding his glass in one hand. Behind those present on the wall hung a stuffed deer head with massive antlers and a painting depicting a landscape with mountains and a lake during sunset. Two men sitting nearby supported Mr. Pierce. One of them said that the demons from the other territory did not care about their deplorable situation from the high bell tower. Based on this, they would come again with 100% probability. Another added that they all did not want to put the western city of Yuxi in such danger. A man named Pierce, however, suggested that the main character, in connection with such a situation, leave everything as it is. At the same time, the overweight man slowly began to get bills of money from under his waistcoat, as if wanting to bribe Lord Lead with these funds. Mr. Pierce went on to say that they did not want any internal conflicts and strife in the poor western city of Yuxi, and then asked Lord Lead himself for his opinion on this matter. The main character sat with a stone expression on his face, frowningly looking at the money in the hands of a man. Lord Lead slowly placed his glass of red wine on the wooden table. After that, he replied to Mr. Pierce that he understood what the man was asking for. The main character added that he wants to learn something from the man. Mr. Pierce smiled, which made his already narrow eyes slits, and said that Lord Lead should quickly ask about what interests him. At this moment, the protagonist in a confident tone asked how a man with a bald head and overweight was going to protect the poor western city of Yuxi. Mr. Pierce's eyes bulged and he kept his head down, obviously not expecting to hear something like that. The events of the second chapter begin on the streets of the western city of Yuxi, after Lord Lead and the company of Alia visited their new home. The guy and the blonde are slowly exploring the streets of the new city together, and the first one is silent all the way, which is very strange. A girl with blonde hair asks her young master if everything is alright with him. Lord Lead begins to say that these people that the man named Pierce is dealing with are very reluctant to use the demon clan to use the youth to tightly control their own strength and power in the western city of Yuxi. The main character grinned sweetly and stroked the blonde on the head, as he had done before. He convinced the girl that it was not necessary at all. The young man added that it was not good to kill people without any good reason. Lord Lead said that they still needed those people in order to protect the western city of Yuxi. At this moment, someone's small, tender hand gently pulled the fabric of the protagonist's clothing, namely the corner of the elbow of the arm sleeve. The boy turned his head to the side and heard a thin voice asking if the boy wanted wild fruit. Lord Lead opened his purple eyes in surprise and looked at the man in front of him. It turns out that a short girl with pink short hair and huge beady eyes stood in front of the main character. The little girl informed the protagonist that she had picked wild fruits with her own hands, apparently apples, this morning, but they weren't too sweet. Lord Lead smiled affectionately, then leaned a little towards the little girl and asked her the question of how much this girl was willing to sell the wild fruit she had picked that morning. She still asks in the same thin sweet voice if she can have 2 copper moments for the entire product. The girl then even said that if the boy did not agree, then she could then take a few more wild fruits from the tree. To this, the main character asked Alia to give the baby 2 silver, not copper coins. The blonde reached into her small brown bag with her right hand in order to get money out of there. A girl with pink hair bulged her eyes and asked if it was true that the coins would be silver. The little girl held out her 2 small hands to the girl, while smiling happily and giggling. The girl actually saw 2 silver coins in front of her and sighed in delight. Lord Lead reached out to give the money to the little girl, but she did not have time to take it, because some person who had just prevented this exchange from happening. Both the main character and the little girl with pink hair widened their eyes and opened their mouths in surprise. Their facial expressions were exactly the same. This person who prevented the little girl from taking silver coins turned out to be a young boy with red hair, who loudly and demandingly told the main character not to touch his younger sister. At the same time, the guy moved the girl with his left hand and blocked her with his massive body. Lord Lin became very embarrassed, not knowing what to do, and then wanted to clarify the situation and tell what exactly was happening. But at that moment, a young man with red hair turned his head to his sister and asked her loudly that she had forgotten how people treat people like them. The little girl with pink hair folded her arms over her chest, just like angels do, and bulged her blue button eyes. She decided to object to her older brother, but he abruptly interrupted her, not even giving her a chance to speak. The guy loudly and clearly expressed that he repeated over and over again that they did not need any money from these bad and evil people. At this moment, the main character asked aloud whether they and the blonde were representatives of the villains, because that's exactly what happens, according to the red-haired young man. At the same time, Lord Lead pointed his index finger at himself. The red-haired young man, frowning, with some extraordinary force lifted a small dirty stone, which was covered in dust, from the ground and threw it at the protagonist with terrible speed. The stone flew very fast, and also left a yellow glow in the air, as if a meteorite or a comet was falling from the sky. The protagonist caught the flying stone with one of his hands, thus stopping his frantic flight speed. The young man was now sure that the red-haired boy was capable of using magic. Lord Lead carefully examined the stone and thought that this young man is a magician who stands guard over the western city of Yuxi and guards the people. The red-haired guy for the last time loudly shouted to Lord Lead and the blonde to leave and not return, while holding his little sister behind him with one hand. The main character continues to think about this magic. He realized that she was quite weak, if you look closely, and also that the red-haired youth was in the initial stages of learning magic. Lord Lead put out both palms hands forward in a conciliatory gesture, supposedly has nothing against it, and then asked the red-haired guy to calm down. In response to his words, the main character received another stone on the head, as well as a request to leave the boy and his younger sister alone. The red-haired guy went the other way with his sister, introducing himself as Yama as he walked. He added that he had not been a child for a long time, because he was 12 years old, and then, in contrast to what he said, stuck out his tongue while twisting his index finger at his temple. The little girl took her brother by the hand and said that he was not a child, but a fool. At this time, cutting and nasty creaking of iron on the scabbard of a blue sword was heard. It was the blonde who planned to draw her blue sword towards the offenders. At this moment, Lord Lead intervened, who asked the girl to calm down, and then asked if she seriously wanted to attack the child. Alia confidently answered her master that this boy attacked him. At that moment, 2 silver coins flew into the hands of the little girl with pink hair. She opened her large eyes in surprise, and then put out her hands in order to catch them. The baby pulled her hands with coins to her chest and giggled happily, while smiling. Lord Lead, in turn, took one red wild apple and also smiled slyly. The protagonist stared at the floor for a while, then bit off a piece of wild fruit, all the while thinking about the teacher of this young man named Yama and his younger sister. Lord Lead thought that learning the law of magic is worth the overwork of many people, and also the fact that since the founding of the Heavenly Kingdom, only 4 heroes were born, who were at the 10th level. The protagonist remembered that there is only one witch who is able to be at the 10th level. In addition, magic power has no limits, so people said there was a Galero, who was a magician at the time, who used his own power to fight against the forces of the Lord of the 18th Road for the last 3 months. Lord Lead thought to himself that that witch could freely become the key to protecting the poor western town of Yuxi. At the same time, the young man kept the wild fruit to his mouth. However, his clever thoughts were interrupted by the taste of apples. It was so sour that the protagonist could not bear it, so he spat out a piece and threw away the red apple. The young man already had tears in his eyes due to the acidity of this fruit. But then the guy noticed some action of the blonde, so he decided to ask Alia what she was doing. She was squatting and with a sour face was picking red wild apples that were scattered all over the tiled ground. The girl sadly replied that they actually gave silver coins for these fruits. The protagonist, however, did not understand such a strange, in his opinion, behavior of the blonde. But he was distracted from these thoughts by a voice that was heard throughout the street around the corner of a nearby house. A man was asking the others if they had heard Mr. Pierce's order that as long as they handed over their witch they would be completely safe. Lord Lead walked to the edge of the house and heard another person suggest that who, then, would be able to protect them without a witch. Someone replied that Lord Pierce had promised the people that the demon would promise not to invade them as long as the witch was submissive. Another said that Mr. Pierce appears to be the culprit, although everyone still thinks he is a good person. Some of them added that they had heard that Felita was the first kind of demon, so they should have killed her from the very beginning. The protagonist understood from this dialogue that it seems that Mr. Pierce is the one who holds and maintains this western city of Yuxi, and that Felita is a witch. At the very end, the young man heard that these people were going to kill someone with their own hands. Lord Lead thought about why Mr. Pierce did not tell the guy about this and just hid it. Further events were transferred at night of the same day to the Lade residence building. In the building, the light was on only in a few rooms, namely the main character. Lord Lee was sitting at his wooden work table with a cup of some hot drink. A blonde came into the office, who informed her young master that someone was looking for the young man. The guy closed his eyes from fatigue, took a small sip of the drink and asked Alia to invite the visitor in. The wooden door swung open, and on its threshold the same red-haired boy of 12 years named Yama fell to his knees. He humbly folded both hands on the thighs of his legs and looked at the floor. The main character laid his head on the knuckles of his left hand and quietly asked the boy what he was doing here at such a time. And in principle, Alia stood next to her master, a meter away from him. Yama began to bow, thereby beating his head on the floor. He tearfully apologized to Lord Lead for what happened today. The young man said that he greatly regrets what happened, justifying himself by saying that did not know that the main character is the new owner of the city. The protagonist, on the other hand, was simply silent and carefully looked at the red-haired guy while he asked for forgiveness, saying only the word please. After that, the red-haired youth raised his head and loudly with tears in his eyes asked the protagonist to help his master. A boy with red hair named Yama tearfully begged to save his teacher from certain death, which he did not deserve. Lord Lead asked about the fact that his master was Felita. The protagonist said that the townspeople did not like her at all, and then asked about the fact that Yama thinks that he should help him, while all the inhabitants object to this. Lord Lead called these actions a big risk. But then the red-haired boy held out in both hands a small brown book and a brown cover to the main character, saying that it was the personal diary of his master. Yama once again bowed his red-haired head and gave his assurance that his master, Felita, was not a bad person at all. The blonde went up to Yama, took the witch's diary from his hands and handed the thing to her young master right in the hands. The protagonist opened the book on a random page and saw that the entire text of the diary was written by the hand of a witch. The pages had yellowed with age and were stained with blood. The young man carefully studied the text, flipping through a couple of pages and running through them with an interested look of purple eyes. Lord Lead resolutely stood up and placed both palms on the surface of the wooden table. Then he called the girl standing next to him by name. The main character asked the blonde to get dressed as soon as possible. He pulled the cloak over himself, fastening it tightly around his throat. Lord Lead headed for the exit with a confident step. The blonde dressed in blue armor and confidently followed her young master with her tail. The protagonist told Ali to follow him, and he would try to do something for the red-haired boy's master. Pitt, however, remained on his knees in Lord Lead's office. The events of the new chapter begin late at night. A white-haired girl was tied to a long wooden post, her mouth covered with a white cloth. There was a crowd of green demons around the girl, and she thought to herself that people should not be hated, they should be protected. She had bright yellow eyes that contrasted with her white complexion. The girl sadly looked at the floor and thought about her mother. Before the eyes of the girl stood the face of a poor mother, who quietly shed salty tears. Her mouth was also covered with a white cloth, but she called softly to her daughter, named Felita. Felita recalls her mother, who many years ago was also tied to a wooden pole with her mouth shut. A girl with snow-white hair stood at the end of a huge crowd, holding her grandfather's hand. She asked him what was wrong with her. Grandfather also had snow-white hair on his head, under his nose, on his chin. On his head was a large brimmed hat. He answered his granddaughter's question that her mother had become a dirty person. Grandfather stroked the baby on the head and said that all this no longer mattered. At the same time, the snow-white girl had her right eye closed, as if she had been hit on it. Grandfather looked at the burning torches at the pillar with Mom and said that the fire would cleanse the dirty soul of Mom. The little girl looked sadly at the wooden pole with her mother, and a bright fire was reflected in her yellow eyes. Grandfather squatted down and hugged his granddaughter tightly by the shoulders. He took his eyes off his daughter, directed him to the floor, and finally said that the gods would forgive her mother for her sins. At this moment, someone from the crowd brought torches and thereby set fire to the witch. Further, Felita's memories are transferred to a certain period of time. She remembers how the boys threw stones at her. At the same time, they laughed at her, saying that a monster was approaching them, so they should hurry up and run to hell. The little girl tried to fight off painful stones, covering herself with both hands, while saying that she was not a monster. On another day, a guy with two girls offended Felita again. He grabbed the baby by the snow-white curls and asked that since she said that she was not a monster, then why did her hair have such a color? At the same time, the girl nearby called Felita gray-haired, and her girlfriend called a simple bug. The boy began to say that he heard from his mother that Felita is a monster who was born by the mother and family of the demon. A girl with snow-white hair tearfully asked to be let go. At this time, another boy came, who brought a slop bucket with smelly waste. He completely poured the terribly dirty rusty water with all sorts of larvae, beetles and worms floating in it onto the snow-white hair of the baby. That same evening, Felita barely made it home and knocked on the wooden door. She began to open on the other side. It was grandfather who opened the door and stood in the aisle. Felita called her grandfather's name in a hoarse and terribly sad voice. The little girl first asked him if she was a good child. Her dress was rumpled, abrasions and scratches were scattered all over her fragile body, and her whole head was dirty. Grandfather, looking at his poor and unfortunate granddaughter with snow-white hair, had tears in his eyes. The baby came closer to the only relative and quietly burst into tears. Grandfather put one big hot hand on her cheek in order to pity and support. The poor little girl listened attentively to the words of her only relative, so after the last phrase she grunted with interest. The next day, namely in the early morning, the little girl tried to get some books she needed from the topmost shelf of the massive bookshelf. It was very difficult for the girl to reach her due to her small stature. Then it is shown how Felita was sitting calmly against the purple wall and carefully reading this same hardcover book. She heard someone's voice, whose representative was looking for the monster. At this time, two boys approached her who had previously offended her. They saw the girl and stopped a few meters away from her, saying that their monster was reading. One of them was already holding the coveted stone in his hand in order to throw it at the poor little girl. But he did not have time to do this since his fifth point, or rather the clothes that covered it, suddenly, for no reason at all, caught fire with a bright flame. And the reason for this was Felita, who, with a slight movement of her hand, lit the clothes on the offender. Both young men ran as fast as they could, while shouting loudly to the whole street that a monster with white hair could work miracles. After some time, some unfamiliar woman with a bun on her head loudly asked the baby's grandfather standing opposite about what was happening with the monster, and how she could be a witch. The woman stood straight with the palms of both hands at her sides. She screamed loudly that the monster dared to use its terrible power. Behind them stood a crowd of people who also heard these women's cries about a girl who works miracles. She reached her hand to the drawstrings of her grandfather's hats and pulled them hard. The woman said that the old man should give up this child because she had learned such bad things from the book. At that moment, behind all this crowd, a loud crunch of a massive tree that had just broken was heard. The woman with the bun turned over her right shoulder and opened her eyes wide. The woman saw how a huge massive crashed to the ground with a roar, thereby dispersing people. Now the crowd of people, frightened, turned in horror towards the remaining stump from the tree and saw a girl standing in that place. The person who knocked over the tree was Felita. She loudly spoke to this woman that she would stop immediately intimidating her beloved grandfather. In this crowd of dissatisfied people, Mr. Pierce miraculously found himself with his thin mustache and thick cheeks. The man grinned slyly when he first saw Felita and asked if she was that girl. Mr. Pierce turned out to be an honorary noble of the western city of Yuxi. He offered a girl with snow-white hair to become a city witch in order to protect the people and residents. The man approached Felita in tight and hugged her thin shoulders with one hand. He promised the girl that he would definitely give her the most suitable gift. Felita blushed at this attitude when she heard from Mr. Pierce that he would make sure that she and the old man did not have to worry about food and clothes in the near future. After that, he squeezed the woman's shoulder tighter and then slid his hand down to the very thin waist. The man informed Felita that he simply had additional conditions, namely to become one of his concubines. Felita was horrified at this suggestion. She sharply set fire to Mr. Pierce's hand. The bald man called his guards for help, and they only asked if he was okay. Mr. Pierce looked angrily after the fleeing girl and loudly said that the race of half-blood demons is not a little, but even has too high an opinion of itself. A few days later, Felita returned to her home. As soon as she opened the door, she began to tell that today she managed to take a large amount of various materials from the demonic family. At that moment, the sweet smile disappeared from her already pale face, which suddenly became even more pale. She widened her eyes in horror and rolled her mouth. The girl saw fragments of glass in a broken white mug on the wooden floor of her house. The books, which usually always stood exactly in their places in the bookshelf, now lay on the floor in a torn and rather rumpled state. In addition, right in the middle of the room on the floor lay the body of grandfather, under which a huge pool of spreading scarlet blood was visible. The old man was still conscious. He slowly opened his eyes and quietly mumbled to his granddaughter to return to some tower. The man struggled to raise his hand and with a trembling body to extend it to his granddaughter. Felita fell to her knees in front of the old man. The girl wept bitterly and said that everything that happened only through her fault. She took the still burning grandfather in her snow-white hands when he continued to try to say something to his beloved girl. All his beard and mustache were stained with scarlet burgundy blood. Meanwhile, Mr. Pierce was at his house and chatting with a friend. He asked if the master was afraid of the witch's revenge. Mr. Pierce replied that the girl was not at all brave enough to kill anyone. He added that Felita was born only to be a modest person, and this feeling of inferiority took root. Now Felita has returned to reality. The words of the dying grandfather were spinning in the buzzing head of the girl that all people simply do not understand and are afraid of her. But she, in spite of everything, must protect this city of Yuxi, because there is always an important reason for this. At this time, green monsters with strange ears with their clawed sharp paws touched the limbs of the witch's body, thereby tearing the black tight-fitting dress that was on the girl. Felita looked down with a sad look, and thought only that there would be the very person who would accept you for who you are. It was at this moment that the ropes that held Felita's body on the pole came apart at the seams. It turned out that Lord Lead and his companion Alia arrived in time. The blonde still drew her blue sword in order to free the witch. Fleet widened her eyes in surprise, as she did not expect rescue and help at all. The girl was ready to die for the people of the western city of Yuxi. The first to break the silence was the voice of Lord Lead, who loudly, but with a sly smile, asked if these green monsters were not aware that his private property, as the owner of this western city of Yuxi, was sacred and not touchable. The main character put one of his legs, which was bent at the knee, on the corpse of a small green monster and again asked about who nevertheless disobeyed, and then dared to offend, and even in such a vile way, a magician belonging to this western town called Yuxi. The protagonist then took a few steps and ended up behind the witch. He slowly began to untie the tight ropes. The young man confidently told the girl with snow-white hair that from tonight she would completely belong to him, as the owner of Yuxi's western territory. Once the witch's hands were free, she pulled the white cloth from her mouth. She said that Lord Pierce had made a promise to the people that only by handing her over to the demons would Yuxi City be able to achieve the long-awaited peace. Felita added that since the main character came here, he probably does not know, but she is half a demon. The girl sadly folded both hands on her chest, as she did before, and asked to simply tie her back to the wooden pole. The main character smiled sweetly and asked a question about what that witch really thinks about the fact that the title of Chief Lord of the city does not say or mean anything. Lord Lead continued his speech in the form of a short monologue by saying that even if the witch is half a real demon, as long as she is Felita, then the girl is the precious city magician. At this time, another female figure appeared behind the witch, placing her iron-armored hand on her thin shoulder. The blonde girl caught up with Felita and said, as long as her young master said such words, in the future, Yuxi City would have only one ruler. Alia, with a warlike expression on her face and a pose of her whole body, put her naked sword into a blue scabbard. Further events again moved to Mr. Pierce with a bald head, a strange mustache, and overweight. A man in a purple suit, as if by the way, adds that he remembered that there was also a very beautiful girl next to Lord Lead. Mr. Pierce himself grabs his servants by the leg and says that they will need to contact the clan of neighboring demons and allow them to attack the city several times. The man adds that if Lord Lead still wants to remain the ruler of the town, then he can only depend on them, and that then they can get this beautiful woman. A man in a blue uniform rises from his seat and raises his glass of red wine. He asks Mr. Pierce to make a toast, and another in a purple suit adds that Brother Pierce is really very big. He asks Mr. to be as smart as possible in order to overcome all these problems. All three men clink their wine glasses and cheer loudly enough. Exactly at this moment, Mr. Pierce and his friends turn their heads to the side and ask in surprise if Lord Lid is in front of them. Lord Lead, on the other hand, sits on a mountain of corpses a few meters away and holds a glass of red wine in one hand. One of his legs is bent at the knee and placed on the thigh of the other. The protagonist smirks and says a strange phrase out loud. "Hey, pig's head." The events of the new third chapter begin exactly in the place where the last second chapter ended. The dining table is completely upside down. Glasses and glasses with red wine are spilled, plates with all sorts of dishes are beaten, and the food has long fallen out of them. He accidentally stepped on a fat chicken leg while running fast, because of which he slipped and almost collapsed to the floor. That someone was a man in a purple suit that barely fit over his fat body. He was shouting at the whole mansion, shouting that Lord Lead would not come closer to him. That is, he would not come closer. All this time he is running away from the young man. But the protagonist kicked the man in the purple suit right in the stomach with one leg. Mr. Pierce's friend in the purple suit coughed and fell to his knees on the tiled floor. Due to the fact that this man, as always, ate a lot, after the blow he immediately vomited under himself. He bent over in 3 deaths, tucking both legs. The man in the purple suit tried to focus his gaze, and therefore, with difficulty, but noticed Lord Lead out of the corner of his eye. The protagonist now stood with a long stick in his hand. He loudly asked that this was all that was enough. The young man began to tell that he himself had heard that the city was in hard times, full of poverty and hunger, but this man in purple clothes was sitting quietly, eating and drinking. At this time, the main character noticed behind him in the other corner of the room the quiet movements of Mr. Pierce. He tried to slyly disappear, taking small steps getting to the right front door. But it was not there. A wooden stick flew right a few centimeters from the man's bulging belly. Mr. Pierce stared in surprise at the object, which now prevented him from passing further, and also meant that Lord Lead had finally noticed him. The protagonist asked with a grin that he really wants to just run away. He added that the number of people who are in this room does not matter. The young man did not have time to finish, because someone's loud exclamation was heard behind him. It was a man in a purple suit. He jumped up, while raising a white bucket or pot above him. The man wanted to hit the head with this object, thereby killing the main character, shouting that he was just a child, so he must die. But Lord Lead was not really a simple boy, so he managed to dodge and also hit the purple-robed man in the face with a savory slap. He already flew off several meters, failing to kill the young man. At this time, a thin man in a blue uniform woke up, who grabbed a knife with one hand, and flew at the speed of light to meet Lord Lead. He shouted to the young man to get what he deserved. However, the main character managed to react quickly here too, so the guy managed to hit him hard in the face with his fist. Mr. Pierce was crawling on all fours like a real dog, trying to save his skin and get out of this room, away from Lord Lead. There were still requests for mercy around the room, as well as questions like the one who touches my ass. But before Mr. Pierce had time to crawl to the exit, the figure of the protagonist stopped in front of him, namely his feet in flip-flops. The man tearfully asked to stop this circus and just calmly and adequately discuss everything. The young man stared at him with a murderous and withering look. But the main character is not going to listen to the speeches of Mr. Pierce, so he cruelly grabs him by the collar of his jacket and lifts him above the ground with one hand. He says he didn't think the bald man was going to be polite when he started coughing and choking. In this regard, the protagonist took the initiative to speak to himself, immediately asking the man if he wants to give half of all his property and fortune so that Lord Lead will spare all their miserable lives. The other 2 men sat with their backs to each other. At the same time, they were tightly tied with a tight rope. Mr. Pierce, fearing for his life, croaked that he would do everything. But one of the men, namely in a blue uniform, objected loudly. He asked with an angry expression about who said that to the guy. The man in the uniform added that if the protagonist wanted half of their property, then why not rob them all completely? At this moment, the main character threw the body of Mr. Pierce into 2 of his friends sitting on the floor. All 3 grunted loudly in pain. Lord Lead, in turn, went up to the wall, in which a long wooden stick was stuck. The young man pulled her out of there and asked if it seemed to him, or if he wants to say that the guy made it all up. The protagonist began to take steps towards the crippled 3 men, while throwing this very battle stick over one shoulder. He again asked Mr. Pierce about what he would say to him and answer the question asked. Mr. Pierce got to his feet and said that the main character heard everything correctly, while calling Lord Lead your lordship. Behind him stood the other 2 of his friends who vehemently cursed. Mr. Pierce turned around and asked his friend to shut up, if he valued his life. The protagonist grinned happily and again turned to a man with a bald head and overweight. The guy said that he was a pretty smart person, so he decided to be merciful and kind to the maximum. The purple man asked Lord Lead about the fact that he was driving them out, nobles, with his own hands. Mr. Pierce was able to cover his comrade's mouth in time and said that they had nowhere else to go but Yuxi City. The protagonist kicked Mr. Pierce hard in the stomach with one foot, causing him to stagger and fall on his back. Lord Lead said he didn't care. He just wanted them out of his city as fashionable as soon as possible and as far as possible. Lord Lead continued to say that he just wanted to kill all those present in this room. But Felida asked not to do this, so the men should thank the witch in everything. The protagonist added that he decided to take half of their property from them, so it's a good deal for the men. Further events take place after a short period of time, all in the same building of the residence. By this time, all half of the men's property had been collected and packed into carts and wagons, which were drawn by horses. The coachman beats his horse on the 5th point, or rather on the buttock, and shouts that she should go. As the carts move away from the mansion, the protagonist, who stands alone in the yard, waves his hand. Lord Lead says quite loudly that those men can completely trust and count on him. The young man confidently promises to take good care of the estate and servants. Immediately after that, the smile disappears from the face of the young man and is replaced by a frown. Next to him, a few meters behind, is Alia. The protagonist tells her that she knows perfectly well what to do. She bows 90 degrees and hurries to fulfill the order of her young master. Further events take place on the same night. At that time, the wagons drove away from the city of Yuxi. One of the men asks his brother Pierce that they just take it and leave. He says that he cannot bear this humiliation. Mr. Pierce replies that he considered a loser, and now all this does not matter. The man adds that they have money, so they should go east first, to the lands of Lord Linen, and then lay low for a while. Mr. Pierce informs them that they will then be able to return to Yuxi City and attack. A man in a purple suit twirls a thick red mustache and says that the relationship between Lord Lead and his father has long since ended. He adds that due to their strained relationship, the king doesn't care about his child. Just as all the men were trying to come up with a new successful plan, their wagon turned over with them. The horse reared up. Mr. Pierce stuck his head out of the carriage door and loudly asked the coachman what had happened. The man apologized, and then replied that the whole reason was in the horse, which was frightened of the man standing in the way. Mr. Pierce first asked in a displeased tone about the blocking of the road. Then he did not even begin to listen to the coachman's answer, as he immediately said that he was now in a bad mood, so he simply asked to crush him. That someone was Alia in her blue battle armor. She jumped high into the air, kicking off the ground with her feet as hard as she could. The girl raised her sword above her head and resolutely went to fulfill the order of her young master. Then the events returned some time ago at the moment when Felida was already sitting warm in one of the rooms of the protagonist's residence, surrounded by care from the servants and Lord Lead. The girl thanked the young man for the fact that he managed to save her from death. The girl with snow-white hair said that Lord Lead saved her life, but she still simply has to ask the guy for one favor. Felida looked pitifully at the main character with the eyes of a puppy and said a magic word. The girl tearfully asked Lord Lead not to kill anyone, since she does not want at least one person, no matter who he is and whoever he is, from the western city of Yuxi not to suffer, and everything is possible in order to live as best as possible longer. The events then jump back into the carriage with the three men. There were screams and screams of Mr. Pierce and his comrades asking them to come to the rescue and not kill. None of them survived. Now the events are moving while Mr. Pierce was eating and saying that Felida is really a stupid girl. He said that the guards in the western city of Yuxi must be so good in order to stop the demons. Mr. Pierce added that by giving a group of women to demons every year, all problems are solved. The man added that as for the rejected women, they still have nowhere to run. Lord Pierce says that for such women, death is the highest reward he has bestowed upon them. At the end he adds that when Yuxi City will come to an end, they will just pack their things and run away. The protagonist, who all this time stood behind the wall and heard the speeches that the man made, thought that such a non-entity really deserves just everything to stay alive. Further events are postponed to the next morning. Lord Lead stood in the main square of the city and told that last night the nobles, which were much more than 20 people, led by Mr. Pierce, moved east with the family fortune, and then died tragically, due to the poor management of the city. Lord Lead asked everyone to calm down first. He then reported that after checking, he learned that Mr. Pierce and his comrades in the courtyard had been killed by demons. A person in the crowd raised his hand high and said in a loud voice that the witch Felida was the only person who had enough strength to protect the entire western city of Yuxi from the demon attack. He added that now they did not have the witch Felida, and then asked what they should do now. After these words, some girl began to shed bitter tears, saying what she had told everyone else for a long time, that Mr. Pierce could not be trusted. In the end, she simply repeated tearfully the question of what they should all do now. The protagonist loudly declared that Mr. Pierce had lied to all the poor people, including the witch Felida. Lord Lead said that he did not give the witch to the demons, but was going to use her for his own purposes. The young man said that the whole alleged peace treaty with the demons was also a lie. The main character continued to say that Mr. Pierce wanted to give the city of Yuxi to be torn to pieces by demons, so that they would kill all the people. The young man said that the demons from the neighboring lands were supposed to rob and kill the inhabitants, while he himself would run away to the east to finally enjoy his life with his property. The protagonist proudly said that he independently found the witch Felida and that she was alive. At this time, enthusiastic and joyful exclamations went through the crowd that now they are all saved, since the girl is in good health. Further events are postponed to a later time of the same day. Alia was pouring hot tea from a small teapot for her young master. Lord Lead was sitting in his own beautiful residence of Lead, sitting on his desk chair and leisurely drinking tea from a white china cup. Alia, who was standing a few steps away, reported that people had gathered outside to apologize to Felida. Lord Lead opened a thick-bound book and asked the blonde if there was any more news. Alia handed the letters to the protagonist and said that they were from Lord Linjeng, Lord Jiachan, Lord Yunhai, the first of which lives in the east, the second in the north, and the third in the south. Lord Lead took the letters in his hands, quickly unfolded them one by one, and scanned them briefly. From the letters he read, the protagonist realized that the lords of the east, north, and south want to visit the young man, his poor city full of poverty and devastation. He crumpled these letters, his face twisted into a terrible grimace of surprise. The events of the new chapter begin in the dream of the protagonist. Lord Lead dreams of his older brother, who stands opposite the young man and asks him if the main character received his letter. The guy comes up to Lord Lead and leans a little towards his face. He asks how to live the main character in this terrible, impoverished town of Yuxi. And after that, the elder says that he is able to make the life of his third brother much more interesting. Before the eyes of Lord Lead was only the face of a relative, and close-ups. At this moment, the protagonist woke up from a dream, while screaming at the top of his lungs. He squeezed the blanket's shoulder width apart with both palms of his hands. The young man clutched his head with both hands, burying his fingers in his brown hair. Lord Lead thought only that this dream he had just had was not the one he would have wanted to have at his young age. At this time, the guy noticed out of the corner of his eye someone's presence on his bed a little to the right. The protagonist turned his head in that direction and noticed the sleeping Felida. She was wearing a simple black spaghetti strap nightgown. From her long white hair grew orange ears, just like a fox. In addition, from under the black sleeping dress of the girl with snow white hair, a long red tail, exactly like that of a fox, stretched out. The main character almost fainted when he saw this whole picture right in front of his nose, and even on his bed. The young man's jaw just fell off at that moment. Lord Lead noticed how the girl assumed a sitting position, then pulled the edge of the white blanket towards herself and shouted at the top of her voice to the girl, asking her what she was doing in the youth's bedroom at such a time. The witch sleepily rubbed her red eyes. The girl sat down comfortably and asked the guy a counter question that the main character didn't point out to her, that she had to accompany her master in bed. The young man moved towards the witch and took her thin shoulders with both hands. He addressed her as a comrade Felida, saying that he had his own ethics of behavior and habits. The protagonist clarified that earlier he helped Felida not for something like escort in bed. Then the girl remembered his own words about how the guy said that from that very day she would be his own sorceress. The witch asked if Lord Lead said these words. He narrowed his purple eyes and stated that he didn't talk like that, so he asked not to say any nonsense. Felida continued to ask questions that maybe the young man meant that from that very day she would have to become his dog. Lord Lead asked the girl to stop her dangerous act of changing his own previously spoken lines without permission. He asked the witch to remove all these ornaments, like red ears and a tail, from himself. At this time, the door to the room was opened by Alia, who was about to wake her young master. But what was Alia's surprise when she saw in front of her a picture of her young master sitting on the bed with a witch and taking off her red ears. The guy asks her to stop moving and make any even small gestures, but Felida laughs softly and says that she is tickled. Alia urgently decided to go out and close the door behind her. Her face was embarrassed to the point that it changed its color to blue. The main character began to justify himself to the blonde, saying that sometimes the eyes do not see the truth. He added that approximately 80% of human information is visual. The guy said that when a person sees something, he immediately believes in it, but scientific research shows that you cannot blindly believe everything that you see. The blonde did not listen to the monologue with explanations from the protagonist, but only tried to hide as soon as possible. It was on that day that Alia broke through and rose to a whole 5th level in swordsmanship. Further events occur after some time. When the weather is sunny, Lord Lead walks through the brick-walled building with tall windows in company with Alia. The young man clears his throat into his fist and asks the blonde about the exact number of people who came to sign up for military service. The girl walked with a stony expression and replied that there were only about 100 people. The blonde added that, however, with the lowering of standards, exactly 81 men were admitted. Alia tells her young master that she noticed that in the faces of people who wish to enter military service, there is no fighting spirit and desire to win. The protagonist, along with his companion, pass by the rows of men who will soon become liable for military service. Lord Lead loudly announces to all the surrounding men that the blonde Alia will give each of them a gold coin. The protagonist says that the gold coin is the amount of their monthly salary. Men, on the other hand, roll their eyes and begin to whisper, as they did not expect such payment for their military service and duty before. Lord Lead continues to say that they all came to this place to sign up for military service, and also to receive a salary after the war with demons from neighboring territories was completely over. The protagonist smirks and says that everything he said earlier can be seen from the looks of these men. He adds that, based on all this, the young man is giving a gold coin right now, and in return he only wants all the military personnel to simply survive. The guy says that he wants these men to kill as many enemies, demons as possible, instead of just giving up their valuable lives for nothing. The protagonist asked all the men that they still want to be destroyed by demons of their own free will, and that their native land be trampled by demonic forces. At such words and expressions, the men were embarrassed and bowed their heads, ashamed of their helplessness and fear. Lord Lead stood up on a pedestal and said that Felida had returned. He asked everyone present if they wanted to be like the witch, that is, the strongest pillar of Yuxi City. Lord Lead said that then the warriors should work hard and not think about death. The protagonist sharply pointed a finger at a tall guy with blue hair and asked what his name was. He was a little embarrassed, but replied that Luger. Lord Lead asked Luger to come closer to him. He complied with the request and stood behind the young master. He surpassed the protagonist in growth by almost 2 heads. The young man informed everyone that Luger was the person who was almost at the 2nd level of swordsmanship, and therefore was appointed temporary captain. Some active man raised one hand up and asked the main character on the floor when they would start their first workout. City Lord Lead responded by saying that they needed to start training and exercising as early as possible in order to resist the sudden demonic invasion of Yuxi City. The guy praised the man who asked for the wonderful question, saying that it was good that they thought about it at all. However, he advised that now was not the right time for such thoughts. The young man then went on to say that all men need to train and exercise a lot, not only to strengthen their own strength, but also to improve mutual understanding between members of the service within the team. Alia stood aside, quieter than water, below the grass, and listened to the clever speeches that her young master was making. He reported that, above all else, they needed to get to know the surrounding men as much as possible. The main character explained this by the fact that now these servicemen are not just someone to each other, but brothers in arms, although not by blood. Some time later, when the sun was rapidly rolling towards sunset, and it began to get dark on the street, Lord Lead, in the company of his eternal companion Alia, was walking along the streets of his own western city, Yuxi. After these words, the guy's stomach growled from hunger, and he asked the blonde about what they would have for dinner today. Alia went on to say that next month they would only have stewed cabbage with radish, and after that stewed cabbage with radish, and then the same thing many times in a row. In conclusion, she added that next year they would eat nothing but stewed cabbage with radish. At this time, someone loudly and affably called the protagonist the City Lord Lead. It turned out to be a girl with pink hair and her older brother named Yama. The little girl waved her hand to the young man, while the guy saw these children and smiled at each other. The girl ran up to the main character, and he gently stroked the baby on the pink head. The young man asked the girl if she was picking wild fruits from the trees today, as she did before, in order to earn an extra penny for the house. The little girl, in response, boasted that she announced that now they do not need to earn extra money. At this time, Yama approached and thanked the young god for saving his master. Then the boy asked about Felida's well-being and whether the girl was alright. It was evident that he was not very comfortable talking to Lord Lead, but he tried very hard. The main character responded positively and smiled sweetly. Yama, on the other hand, kicked a stone with one foot and said that the girl with snow-white hair, in fact, does not get along very well with other people around her. The boy then asks Lord Lead not to blame Felida for being inaccessible, and saying almost nothing, only very rarely and on business. The protagonist, in his head, remembers the moment he woke up this morning and saw the witches in his bed. Yama continues to say about Felita that it is good that his master has returned, since he has already managed to learn a lot from her. The boy adds that a girl with snow-white hair is always very beautiful and strong. Lord Lead scratches his chin doubtfully and replies to the boy that sometimes it happens very often that people need to choose a new direction in life. The young man then just asks Yama not to be stupid and superstitious. At that moment, Lord Lead again remembered this morning, when the behavior of a girl with snow-white hair really would not be worth seeing, remembering, and even more so applying. Lord Lead hoped for understanding from Yama, but he became very angry and pointed the index finger of his left hand at the young man. The main character crossed his arms over his chest and told the boy that everything is possible. At this time, Alia, who had been standing behind the young man all this time, called her young master. Lord Lead did not immediately respond, because he was still hovering somewhere deep and far in his thoughts. He turned to the blonde, who walked up to the guy behind him and whispered something in his ear. At this moment, the protagonist smirked slyly, and said out loud that someone had arrived earlier than they expected. The events of the new 6th chapter begin the next morning. The sky above the mountains is just beginning to gradually turn into soft pink shades. Lord Lead sits with his legs dangling down on top of a stone fortress that was built to protect the city of the western city of Yuxi. Behind him stands Felita, who holds in one hand a stick that is twisted at the top and looks like a staff. The young man, crossing his arms over his chest, says aloud that he noticed someone. It turns out that a large crowd of green monsters with long white tusks and strange ears, like aliens. Some of the demons are ridden on horses as strange in appearance as they are. The blonde raises her head up and looks directly into the eyes of her lord, saying that he simply does not have enough strength to block or dodge the arrows of the lower demons of the neighbors. Lord Lead tells Felita that he leaves the rest to her. She nods gravely and says to really leave it to her. After that, the witch firmly grabs the protagonist by the hand and then asks to stand behind her. Felita continues to firmly hold Lord Lead's hand with one of her own, and with the other puts in front of him that wooden stick, which turns out to be a handmade witch's staff. The girl with snow-white hair says aloud that she feels great relief while now holding her master, that is, the main character, by the hand like this. Lord Lead is, of course, surprised by her words, but Felita goes on to say that there are much more demons today than there were before. The witch asks the protagonist if she can handle it, and if she can win this battle with the demons. She says that even she herself is interested in the result. At this time, Felita hears how the main character answers her that she can handle it. The young man squeezes her hand tighter and adds that she will not fight alone. She has him and Alia. The witch smiles sweetly, her cheeks slightly flushed. She then proceeds to cast the spell fluently, the twisted tip of the makeshift staff glowing bright yellow as she does so. Felita still holds the main character by the hand, and the second one raises his wooden stick high above him. A large number of luminous bright circles, inscriptions and images of red, orange, and yellow colors form around that. The clouds in the sky at this point are very thick, especially over the witch herself. The wind becomes so strong that the skirts of the girl's white cloak, as well as the hair of both Felita and Lord Lead, rise and fly up in the air. 3 burning platforms appear high in the sky, and a bright star burned in the center of the topmost one. Green demons one after another raise their terrible bald heads to the sky, which lights up for many kilometers. And at that moment, burning beams, like set fire to arrows, begin to fall on all the monsters, piercing their bodies with scorching fire. All the demons of green color immediately begin to save their skins and take their feet from this terrible place. All this action in the sky is like the karma of heaven. It was at this time that one can understand how strong the witch Felita is. In addition to fiery arrows, terrible massive wolves with burning bloody eyes, from which a red line stretches, begin to run right from above. The witch herself still stands on the top of the tower and looks menacingly into a place that illuminates the entire sky covered with dark clouds, as if during a thunderstorm. The girl still reads her spell, repeating over and over again like a mantra. In this regard, all 3 platforms in the sky diverge and stand in one line. Now burning, branching thunderbolts begin to emanate from each. They burn and kill everything and everywhere in their path, while accompanying the terrible process with a roar. The witch with snow-white hair opens her mouth and shouts her spell at the top of her voice, which is why, after a few seconds, long crystals of light blue color now grow in the place where the green demons stood for a couple of minutes. Circles with inscriptions and images of this color appear around this crystal mountain. The corpses and bodies of green monsters fly high into the sky, and then fall down. Felita used absolutely all her strength, so she recoils and begins to cough. Sweat drips down her face, as if she's been running for several kilometers continuously, or at least has a fever. At this time, in place of the mountain of crystals, a gap was formed in the ground, which led to hell itself. From above it was quite easy to see the bloody red lava. The witch was very ill physically. She almost began to cry out loud. She was still on her feet, though she was shaking, trembling. A girl with snow-white hair held her homemade wooden staff in her hands. The protagonist approached the witch from behind and hugged her by the shoulders. She, making special efforts, said out of her last strength that the rest of the green demons would have to use stronger, more powerful and advanced magic. At the same time, another group of green monsters, which somehow miraculously managed to escape, advanced to the fortress. But here they were already detained by Alia, who unsheathed her blue sword, taking it out of a beautiful scabbard. The blonde, with a quick and light movement of her hand, took off the head of the green demon, and then the next, and all the other monsters. Lord Lead, on the other hand, hugged the girl with snow-white hair for them and said that without her help it would have been simply impossible to kill such a large number of green demons. The main character gently and reverently stroked the witch on the head and asked for a good rest first, and said that he would now go and bring Alia. Now, at the site of the battle, that is, in front of the fortress to protect the western city of Yuxi, there were only scorched grass, torn earth, many holes and cracks in it, as well as not extinct fires. The whole place was as if fried, as air currents in the form of hot steam emanated from everywhere. Further events occurred after some short period of time. The protagonist slowly explored the place of the battle, as well as the bodies of the dead green monsters. The young man asked himself why he couldn't just leave the whole thing right here, like a boring and annoying game. Lord Lead pulled out the tusks from the green demons and took all sorts of valuable things. The protagonist held on one of his shoulders a bag with all the materials that he managed to get. He suddenly heard some kind of quiet noise on the other side of him, and out of the corner of his eye noticed slight movements. At this time, Felita and Alia stood in each other's company on top of a stone or brick fortress. The girls were discussing something, while quite smiling. Lord Lead, of course, hurried and went to the source of the noise and movements. He stopped in the middle of the forest edge, which was completely overgrown with massive trees and large bushes around the perimeter. In addition, all the air, especially closer to the ground, was hazy or clogged with dust. The protagonist asked someone to leave, as he knows very well that he is very close. Lord Lead loudly asked the one he had just called if he was the head chief of the Green Goblins, assuming that it must certainly be so. At this time, a green wounded body appeared right from behind the bushes, which, moreover, was heavily wound. It was one of those green monsters with small white tusks and long ears like a bat. There was a silver ring in one of the ears. The green demon first of all determined the kind of creature that stood in front of it. This is it about the main character. The creature spoke the word man loudly. Lord Lead narrowed his eyes and thought to himself that they all like to start a dialogue like this. At the same moment, the green monster voiced the phrase from the young man's head exactly as it was not voiced. The green demon coughed ridiculously into the fist of his right hand, which had long, clawed fingers. The creature was twice as tall as the main character, because the second's head only reached the monster's waist. A green-colored creature with a gray beard introduced himself as a minion of Amaphis named Bulan. The demon said that he is one of the main leaders of the demonic race on the entire Western Front. At the same second, the protagonist knocked over a monster with white hair tied in a ponytail, on the back of the head, right on the ground, which was not covered with grass. From this action, which was accompanied by a loud sound like a clap or a strong blow, all the birds scattered from the trees, which had previously sat peacefully and quietly on the branches. To himself, this green demon thought about what happened now and how it happened. At first, the monster was lying face down on the ground, and then turned its head towards the young man standing nearby, a few meters away. The goblin picked up his spear and tried to stand up abruptly in order to hit the young man properly. But it was not there. The protagonist caught a spear with a sharp silver tip with one hand. Lord Lead sadly looked at the green monster and aloud concluded that the creature did not listen to his words on purpose. The young man placed one of his knives with a heavy rumble right on the creature's chest so that it began to cough loudly, trying to catch at least a breath of air. It already dropped its spear from its hand in pain, so that it had no choice but to say that it had already understood and realized everything. After a while, Lord Lead sat opposite the green demon in a yoga position, like that creature. The first thing the monster said was that this time, the new owner of the western city, Yuxi, had won. The green demon said that after such a terrible defeat, monsters from the neighboring territory would never again attack Lord Lead's town. The young man widened his eyes in shock and rounded his mouth. He asked if the green demons would no longer attack the western city called Yuxi. The main character did not like this news at all that, due to the defeat, the demons no longer dare to climb onto someone else's neighboring territory. Lord Lead loudly asked the green creature about where he would then earn money. The protagonist bent his head to the green monster and said in all seriousness that the only useful thing in their town is the neighboring demonic race of green monsters. After that, Lord Lead smiled slyly and raised the index finger of his left hand towards the sky. The youth said with full confidence in his head that he was going to make some special deal with the green being. The green monster inside himself got angry and with a stony expression on his face immediately asks the guy about what he wants from him. The main character, without hesitation, raising his finger to his face, with a smile on his face, says that he wants to open a farm for demons in his western city of Yuxi. The gaze of the black holes with the red light of the green monster heated up to the very limit. He asked if he understood correctly that the young man wanted to triple the breeding of demons. Lord Lead did not expect such a reaction and was afraid of such behavior. He first asked the green monster to calm down and listen to his idea until the end, because this is not breeding demons. Lord Lead said that the plants grown by the hand of demons are many times different from those planted by a simple man. They can be used in different ways, so the price for them is higher. He added that there are also some special types of ores that can be mined and excavated only by the hand of the green demon, and the ores can be used for weapon forging. Lord Lead summed up that he needed a group of demons to be brought here, who would be able to help the residents grow various plants, as well as extract ores of various metals. A green goblin named Bulan frowned heavily and said that he could not just betray his own people of western demons. The young man grinned slyly and said in all seriousness that the monster of green color would still pass them on until he was regularly paid a lot of money. The main character noticed that today Bulan allowed his several thousand demons to come to this territory and fight to the death, just to see the strength of Yuxi City. The leader said that Lord Lead could leave a couple of monsters alive on the battlefield, and then use them for his own purposes, and there would be no need for this conversation. Lord Lead said that he needed demons of the highest quality. With the use of artificial selection, the chances of obtaining rare and precious metals and ores would be much higher. Bulan loudly told the guy that all demons carry the most precious and unique bloodline from one generation to another generation, which supports their kind. Lord Lead says that the fact that Tom managed to deceive the nobles means that he will be forced to capture the city of Yuxi, since the demon cannot return to his homeland without results. The Lord added that one way or another, while the hero is here, the green monster can forget about defeating them, since the creature will never be able to enter the western city of Yuxi. Lord Lead went on to say that as long as they would cooperate and earn a fortune, he would give him an opportunity, and the monster would be able to claim that Yuxi City had been conquered. The demon frowned, absorbed all the information said by Lord Lead and thought deeply about the words and the subsequent consequences. He began to reason out loud that in this way he could not only preserve his status and save his life, but also help the guy deceive all those whom he hates. The main character, in response to his words, stretched out his right hand to the green creature and asked in a satisfied voice whether they had agreed now, because it was beneficial to both. The monster held out his hand in response, and they shook them firmly, thereby concluding a strong contract between the neighboring demons and the people from the western city of Yuxi. After some time, the construction and restoration of the fortress was already underway. Felita was in charge of the work, and Lord Lead gave an assessment, saying that he looked good. He said that although the city wall is fortified, but it still has a ragged appearance. The young man added that this is a good way to confuse demons. At this time, a girl with snow-white hair approached the guy, who called her master by name. At that moment she was shaking her hands off some dirt, slapping them against each other. Felita approached the young gentleman and informed him that she had finished working with the cement and bricks that the guy had ordered a few days ago. Also, a farm for cultivation by demonic forces was built thanks to everyone's efforts. The main character gently stroked his head, complimenting the witch out loud. The young man said that she was actually an amazing girl. She began to smile strongly at these words. At this time, Alia came up to them, who said that the thing that he had previously asked some old man to painstakingly forge was already ready for use. Lord Lead took the thing from the blonde's hands and unwound the brown ribbon. It turned out to be a new staff of purple color with a tip in the form of a diamond of the same color. The main character picked up a magic staff and, smiling, noticed out loud that it looked pretty good. He turned to the witch with the words that it was for her and handed her this new staff. Felita rounded her eyes and mouth, looking at the magical thing in surprise. He said that although all the materials used to create it are relatively rare among the materials that were collected last time, but it's still a piece from a low-level demon, so this staff is not very high level. The main character gave Felita advice so that she could use her entry-level power and conjure much faster than usual and than before. The witch replied that everything was fine. She hugged the new staff tightly and said that if it was a gift from the master, of course she liked it. Felita's cheeks were very flushed, and she herself was already glowing with happiness. The witch thanked her young master from the bottom of her heart. The reaction of the girl to the main character likes that he just broke into a happy and joyful smile. Lord Lead called Alia, who had been standing a few meters behind with a sour face all this time, and asked if she felt how beautiful this wonderful world was. At this moment, the main character abruptly remembered that he had not told both girls some news. He will soon go to Yunai territory in order to take part in a famous auction on that land. The young man told in more detail that a very well-developed business and trade community is located on this very territory of the Yunai state. The main character added that for each year at exactly a fixed time, a large number of auctions of various scales are held. Lord Lead said that a large number of goods and things, including treasures, as well as animals from all over the globe, will be exhibited at this auction in Yunai. The main character said that it absolutely does not matter if this thing flies in the sky and runs on ordinary ground, but anyone will definitely be able to buy it at this famous auction. He was told that they had recently given away a large share of the green demon gold coins, and now they had only a small amount left. The main character has already begun to shed bitter crocodile tears. The girls don't even know how things are with them. Apart from the army with military personnel, there are only 3 of them. He added that he really just wants to look after something, namely if there are any skilled and talented people at the auction in Yunai. Alia confidently said that in this case she would definitely accompany the young man, but the hero stopped her by putting one palm of his hand forward. The young man said that every year a huge number of lords from different lands personally attend this auction, only due to the fact that the security of this Yunai territory is very good. Lord Lead pointed his finger first at the girl with white hair and declared with all seriousness that he was entrusting Felita with the protection of the entire poor western city of Yuxi to her alone. After that, the guy pointed his finger at the blonde and said that Alia would have to look after the green demons that had been sent to the farm earlier. The blonde immediately wanted to object to her young master, frowning and confidently calling the master. After that, the main character stroked the girl on the head and said that he was counting on Alia very much, since the security of this territory completely depends on her. The blonde, in turn, did not happily agree and slightly blushed her cheeks because of the gentle touch of her young master. After a while, the main character was already hurriedly moving away from the brick fortress. Lord Lead waved goodbye to the girls and promised that he would return as soon as possible. The guy thought to himself that Yunai City was looking forward to him, since he would arrive soon. Events are transferred to the dream of the main character. The hero dreams that he is among a harem of beautiful concubines. A young man is sitting on a sofa, and beauties in beautiful red silk dresses are dancing in front of him. One pours the guy alcohol from a white decanter, and the other brings plates of fruit, namely green grapes, directly to the mouth of the protagonist. The girl who is sitting with a tray of food asks Lord Lida to open his mouth and say the letter A in order to feed. The guy does so, and the beauty brings one grape to the mouth of the young man with her gentle hand. At the same time, the girl strongly and completely covers the guy's lips with her palm. The hero bulges his eyes from such an action. Then the girl grabs the main character with one hand, or rather with the fingers of this hand for both cheeks, as if squeezing a little. And after that, she calls him bro. At this moment, a woman's face disappears from this very girl. This strange concubine in a rude voice asks the young man about where he is going, since he is in such a hurry. He quickly opens his eyelids already in life, waking up from a dream. The hero barely refrained from screaming through his sleep after such a moment. The guy was sleeping, sitting on the floor of a wooden cart, while wrapped in a purple blanket. Lord Lead turns his head towards the exit, which was covered with a curtain. On the threshold of the carriage stood a young guy as if from that dream. The young man calls Lord Lida a brother, and then asks where he is going. Is it really also for the auction? The young man said that Lord Lid is a member of the Yunshin family, or, to put it correctly, he is the one who was kicked out of his territory by the king not so long ago. He had wanted to meet him for a long time. Fanyuan Kainyuan went on to say that he had already heard that Lord Lid was a famous master of flower cards in his hometown of Yunshin. The main character by this time had not yet recovered from sleep and therefore sat wrapped in a blanket. He hardly listened to him, but he was interested in the offer to play while they were driving to the city. At this moment, the red-haired young man pulled out and showed his hands, in which various cards for games were stuck. Lord Lead agreed to such a tempting offer. The result made it clear that the main character is good at playing with cards. Lord Lead won all the rounds, repeatedly defeating an inept friend, which is why Fanyuan Kainyuan lost everything. The main character said not to worry about the fact that he lost everything. The young man said his suggestion that he did it temporarily, but then he would definitely return everything. Lord Lead looked at his companion with a serious look and asked the new comrade to just forget about this whole situation. At such words, Fanyuan Kainyuan became even more excited and began to explain that a real man never throws his own words to the wind. If he said he lost, it means he lost. He asked me to wait until he turns the goods he is taking to the auction into money. If he screwed up at the auction this year, then he would never eat meat again. Lord Lead said he didn't need his stuff. He asked to tell about information about his native territory. The young man was delighted and said that he would tell everything he knew. Lord Lead asked what kind of person Lord Jaechin was. The young man replied that he did not know. After that, the question followed if there are skilled craftsmen in the territory of Jaechin at the moment. In the end, Lord Lead asked what the distribution of the army in his territory was. The guy shrugged and said he had never heard of it. Lord Lead asked angrily for the last time about the money in the treasury of the state and the main city, as well as food and provisions for the army throughout the territory of Jaechin. The young man replied that he did not know at all and had no idea. The main character at the same moment lost his temper and shouted loudly with the question of what he even knows then. And this silly guy stretched out one hand and showed a thumbs up. He quietly said that he knew that his 13th sister was very beautiful and quite cute. The main character at this time even reached out in order to hit him properly. At this moment, the young man, apparently under the influence of fear, remembered one information. The young man asked the main character that he had not recently received threatening letters from his father, that is, King Jaeton. The Lord remembered these letters. The young man said that his father would definitely allow the 13th sister and his younger brother to lead troops to the poor western town of Yuxi in order to successfully attack. He said that he himself had nothing to do with the whole situation and the trap, and he added that his 13th sister is really very beautiful, but unfortunately she can't walk. At this time, the coachman said that they had arrived. Someone was calling his master and informed him that their search team had just found a rather rare treasure from a distant sea. The main character thought to himself that this is what this city really looks like. He heard someone say that he had met many heroes from different countries, but no one knew his talents. The young man realized that a lot of things were being sold at this auction, even martial artists with a strong hardening of their skeleton. Lord Lead loudly ordered the coachman to continue driving, and not to stand still. The hero realized that this famous and so-called Yunhai City is nothing more than a simple fair. Suddenly he heard that there were new products in Yunhai City, namely a new singer, a new top brand, different tracks and different girls. The man offered everyone to have fun. At that moment, without hesitation, Lord Lead began shouting at the coachman at the top of his voice to immediately stop the wooden cart right there. The young man did not even understand his reaction himself, because of what he faded after and blushed cheeks. And Fanyuan Kainyuan calmly asked the carriage driver to park the carriage. The two youths got out of the carriage and saw a crowd of several giggling girls in front of them, who were beautifully dressed in silk dresses. They began to wave Fanyuan in greeting. The young man said that this red-colored courtyard is known throughout Yunhai. Lord Lead replied that he was innocent and not such a person, so the main character decided to stay outside. One of the girls ran up to Fanyuan Kainyuan and hugged him tightly by the shoulders. She said she thought the guy had forgotten about her. The young man said that it was impossible, because he was in front of her. When they had already gone into the house, the young man pointed himself back with one finger, saying, as if by the way, that that guy was his older brother and let them take care of him. Those female representatives immediately noticed a handsome young man behind their master and ran up to him. One of the girls called the main character a brother, and the one with short red curls noticed out loud that Lord Lead is a handsome man of simply indescribable beauty. The girls grabbed the guy by the arms and dragged him into the building. Lord Lead began to wail, asking why his own legs did not obey him at all and became so wadded up. After a while he was in the carriage. The young man was kissed by the girls, and traces of their lipstick were scattered all over his face and body. The guy praised Fanyuan for this place. The main character was thinking that for years he had been trying his best to make a good impression on the blonde Alia. However, the main character was not given such a lot of female attention. Fanyuan Kainyuan, who had been nearby all this time, looked askance at the main character and chuckled to himself. It was just a few songs and dances with beautiful girls. At this time, the coachman said that they had arrived. Fanyuan Kainyuan smiled sweetly at his new comrade and said goodbye to his brother that they would see each other a little later. Fanyuan Kainyuan interrupted the speech and asked to be very careful about Bai Feng. The main character bulged his eyes and asked about this man. The young man explained that the auction is being held by Yunhan Phoenix. He added that he did not really belong to a particular being at all, but to Lord Yunhai's own children. He said that according to rumors, this guy is the rarest talent among the entire second generation of Yunhai residents. Bai Feng is very famous and also has a perfectly clean reputation. The second Phoenix is Bai Huang, who is the youngest daughter of the Lord. She became more popular because of her appearance and character, not her skills and achievements. Fanyuan Kainyuan added that he had already met Bai Feng twice in his life, and said that it wouldn't be scary at all if it was just him. After saying goodbye, he added that Lead would understand everything himself, while he would meet Bai Feng. The hero did not know that the young man really knows so many things about Yunhai. At that moment, when the main character had already turned around and walked in the other direction, he was called behind, saying that he did not expect to see him so soon. The main character turned his head to his shoulder and heard the man asking how the young man could ignore them. At the same time, he began to defile Lord Lida in different ways. Lord Lid grinned rapaciously and said with his lips alone that he did not expect this man's injury to heal so quickly. Behind the main character were Lord Yunyang with his third son and grandson, who pointed his finger and loudly declared that the main character would not get away with the incident in Yunchen. Lord Lead is already sitting at a wooden table, on which there is a sign with the inscription Interviewer. There are posters nearby that say about recruiting staff in the western city of Yuxi. The young man is thinking about when he will find talents in internal affairs who will be able to help in the management of the city of Yuxi in the future. At this moment, a white envelope falls out of the pocket of the protagonist's jacket, and the young man notices this movement of the edges of the purple eye. Lord Lead looks uncomprehendingly at the object on the floor, but after a while he grins and decides to pick it up. Picking up the letter, the protagonist says that he almost forgot that in a few days there will be large-scale banquets with lords and mayors from all lands. The young man recalls a conversation with his father, who ordered him to return to his home in Yuxi because he would not be able to afford things at this auction and exposes himself as a laughing stock. The main character laid his head on a wooden table, looking at a white letter with a red seal with a sour face, and thought that they would most likely come to him for sure. At this moment, the young man's eyes opened wide with surprise and joy. He saw that, it turns out, there was something else written on the back of the letter, namely, that after the banquet, a beauty contest for girls will be held on the territory of Yunhai. The very girl who, after taking part, wins this competition will receive not only a symbolic title, but will also be able to take any item from the auction. Lord Lead ran his eyes carefully over the back of the sheet several times and said that Yunhai was very rich, since he could afford such generosity in the form of any item. The main character remembered that his father had previously told him about last year's beauty contest, as well as the fact that the lucky winner was the girl Lord. At that moment, Lord Lead clutched his head and said in disappointment that if he only knew, he would definitely have taken Alia or Felida with him, because they are beauties. The young man thought to himself that he would not give up just like that. Now people from all lands are gathering in Yunhai. He will be able to find a girl with a good figure who will cooperate. Lord Lead smiled and thought that with the help of his excellent makeup and marketing skills, he could turn this girl into the most popular beauty queen. After that, the main character got up from his seat and walked along the city street. He carefully examined every stranger he met, from head to toe. At that moment, Lord Lead noticed the back of the crimson-haired girl's head. The guy immediately, thinking to himself that the target was found, and chased her with all his legs. Further events occur an hour later. The main character is sitting in a dark corner of the street and hiding from someone. His body is exhausted, and there are even abrasions on his face. Having heard which part of his brilliant plan, everything went wrong, Lord Lead remembers running up to a girl with crimson hair and grabbing her by the shoulder. The girl was scared and with horror began to point her finger at the young man, and suddenly there was a tall, muscular guy next to her, who looked at the young man angrily. A couple of minutes later, the red-haired guy held Lord Lida and declared that his sister did not like the type of the main character, because she likes older men. After that, the red-haired guy leaned over to the ear of the main character and informed him that, unlike his younger sister, he liked it. At first, Lord Lead looked dumbfounded at the jock. At this moment, the red-haired guy grabbed the fifth point of the main character with one palm and asked if he wanted him to play with him. At that moment, Lord Lida's eyes almost fell out of their sockets from horror. In the end, now Lord Lida is sitting in an alley and hiding from a red-haired jock who walks very close with the crowd and loudly asks about where his kitten has gone. The young man exhales in a relaxed way when he realizes that the red-haired guy has moved on, and now he is in no danger. He happily wipes the cold sweat from his forehead with his hand. At this moment, the main character strains his whole body because he hears some suspicious noise. The young man turns his head and hears a distinctly male voice. Lord Lead hears someone around the corner asking why she came alone to such a terrible place. At the end, he adds that he followed her all the way from the very beginning. The main character, looking out, thinks about what is happening there. The young man assumes that those people are chasing someone in broad daylight, because it definitely can't be some kind of scam. It turns out that 3 young guys pinned the girl to a stone wall. One of them says it's such a good opportunity, and they can't just let it go. At this moment, a loud, confident voice is heard behind the guys, who orders them to stop all actions. All the guys with a boring facial expression turn around at the voice. Now they see the main character, who crossed both arms on his chest and again in a loud voice with steel notes orders to let this girl go. 3 guys turn on Lord Lida. One of them is who the young man is. A red-haired man standing next to him shouts to mind his own business, and a third begins to knead his fists. Lord Lead, with a sullen expression on his face, says that he is an employee of the Uni-City Security Department, so that's why he urges the guys to surrender and kneel down. All 3 are now heading towards him. One lifts his head high and says he thinks he should kneel down. The other had already taken out a folding knife by that time. When the gangsters approached Lord Lead by less than a meter, the main character punched the first one in the jaw with all his might. He flew away with a painful groan. With the second, Lord Lead was very multiple. The main character kicked Tom in the stomach that he already fell on a mountain of garbage in the alley. Well, the young man abruptly grabbed the last one by the collar, pulled him to bend down to the ground, and at that moment he hit his knee under the ribs, thereby immediately defeating everyone. After a while, Lord Lead stood at full height and held the guys who were unconscious under one armpit. With a smile on his face, he asked the girl if she was injured. At this moment, the young man looked up at Miss and bulged purple eyes. He was greatly surprised by the beauty of the girl he had just saved on his own. The beauty had long chocolate hair and was dressed in a long green dress. She first asked the name of the main character and whether he was a guard of Uni-City. Lord Lead bowed respectfully to Miss and lied that his name was Deli, and that he had been accepted into the Uni-City Guard last year. Then he asked if he could find out her name. The beauty smiled sweetly and said that the guy could just call her Xiao Huang, and then Miss thanked the young man for his help. Lord Lead, in turn, began to ask her what if she didn't mind, but he didn't finish. A sly grin appeared on the main character's face. Lord Lead gently took Xiao Huang's tender palm in both of his hands, covering both sides with his own, and began to ask again. If she doesn't mind, he could be her own agent. The girl opened her orange eyes in surprise. Lord Lead began to say that Miss is very beautiful, so why shouldn't she join the women's beauty contest? Because she has every chance of winning. The main character said that together they would choose the most expensive of all the other things at the auction, and then sell and divide it and get rich in just one night. The girl is once again asked if he is really the guardian of this city. Lord Lead nods and asks a counter question if she has ever heard of Bai Feng and Bai Huang. The main character asks Xiao Huang not to doubt him, and then says that with his help, Miss will be able to perform best at this women's beauty contest. Xiao Huang smiles sweetly and says that she absolutely does not know how to behave at such contests and events, and there are many people who are better than her. Lord Lead says that this is just a small problem. At this time they are already approaching the hotel together, and the main character passes Miss first as a gentleman. After a while, Xiao Huang was sitting in the room, and at that moment the main character asked the girl to tell a little about herself. He wants to know something about her. Xiao Huang that she turned 18 years old. She comes from a very ordinary family, and this morning she went out to buy something, but she ran into those hooligans in the alley. Lord Lead thought to himself that all girls should be extremely careful while walking alone outside the house, since there are a lot of bad guys around, for example him. The main character raised one hand up and said that in order for Miss to believe in him, he would first show his amazing technique called packaging. Xiao Huang turned her head questioningly to the young man and asked about the packaging. At that moment, Lord Lead called a servant to him. He gave instructions, namely, to take money, gold coins, and go to the market, there to buy various cosmetics and props for costumes. When the assistant had gone shopping, Lord Lead sat down in his old place. Xiao Huang first asked why the young man suddenly needed all these things. After some time, several carts drove up to the hotel, which were completely filled with chests and things. 3 men took turns carrying all the items. They were all led by a junior assistant with red hair. He pointed with his finger where and what to put to the rest of the workers. After a while, all the things were already standing along the walls in the room. The assistant informed his master that everything he asked for had arrived and was here. After the assistant left, the main character was relieved to put the blue cup on a wooden table. Now it became clear that the young man had been drinking hot strong coffee all this time. Lord Lid called Xiao Huang, while calling her the youngest. The girl responded to the call of the main character. Although she was looking forward to it, she was still worried. Lord Lid got up from his seat and walked towards Miss Xiao Huang. The guy loudly offered to do what they had been planning all this time. The girl was worried. The main character approached Miss in tight and grabbed her by the wrists. He put her hand against the wall, while the girl herself loudly asked about what the young man was doing. After a while, brushes, jars, and boxes were placed all over the table. In general, the whole table was crammed with various new cosmetics. The young man was sitting in front of the girl. He asked Xiao Huang not to make even the slightest gestures and to keep his eyes completely closed, not to blink from the word at all. Exactly 2 hours later, Lord Lid was lying with his head on the table and barely muttering to himself that he had absolutely no strength to continue. At that moment, he heard Miss tell him that he was very good at this business. The young man was strongly motivated by this. He raised his head and gathered all his willpower into a fist. The main character sat down to sew some kind of thing made of bright red silk. The young man replied to Xiao Huang that he was not good, but just learned a little about it earlier from his mother's mouth. When Lord was trying hard, Miss was asking if she could now look at herself in the mirror in order to see and evaluate makeup. After a while, the conversations of Lord Lida and Xiao Huang could be heard from the hotel. The girl asked about what kind of dress it is if it reveals too many parts of the body. After that, Lord Lid brought the floor mirror to Xiao Huang. Now Miss saw in her reflection a lovely and very beautiful girl in a red silk dress. Putting her palm to the flawless, she couldn't believe what she was seeing with her own eyes in her reflection. She added that the makeup is just incredible. The main character laughed and said that in some sense this also applies to types of magic. The guy approached the girl and said that now it was time to study. Lord Lid stood a meter in front of Xiao Huang. He asked her to start by trying to say Brother Deli with an extremely cute tone and facial expression. Miss stared at him uncomprehendingly and asked with horror. The young man again asked the girl to repeat after him. Xiao Huang tried her best. Lord Lid loudly made a remark to the girl, saying that there was not even a gram of feelings in her words at all, so it was only 3 points. The girl thought about it and again put all her strength into her voice, saying Brother Deli. On the second attempt, the main character has already given Miss 4 points. Xiao Huang then repeated his invented name 3 times in a row, and then she turned her head the other way out of shame. Lord Lid loudly announced that 0 points. The main character said that whoever does not have a smile will not win. Xiao Huang threw a pillow and loudly asked about why she should please them all. Lord Lid removed the pillow from his face and asked why Xiao Huang would not learn from Bai Huang. The guy thought to himself that even though he hadn't seen her, he was just showing off to her. He said that she was smart, beautiful, and as long as Miss looked like a second phoenix, she would easily win the women's beauty contest. These words shocked the girl. Xiao Huang lowered her eyes to the floor and calmed down a little. She asked the main character if he liked Bai Huang. The girl said that it was very difficult to keep up with her. The main character again put one hand on Mrs. shoulder, gave a thumbs up and said that nothing is impossible in this world if your mind is set on it. The young man said that, therefore, as long as she obeys and does what he teaches her, she will definitely become a real beauty queen and win the competition. Xiao Huang removed the main character's hand and said that there would be a lot of crouching tigers and hidden dragons among the participants in this year's women's beauty contest. When the girl walked away, she started talking about the fact that there is a person in Yunai who is actually the most beautiful, but he is not destined to be at a beauty contest. Xiao Huang lowered her yellow eyes and said that according to rumors, this most beautiful person is a man. She added that she had heard it from her own brother. This said that this most beautiful man was placed in a brothel, and he sang very often by the river. Lord Lid actually came to that place and stood at the end of the huge crowd. This added that the ransom price of a handsome man is 10,000 gold coins. He sat on a small stage in front of crowds of people and played a stringed musical instrument. He had long dark hair, a multicolored dress and a purple cape with a hood. When it all started, the man sang a song very touchingly and also performed a dance, moving smoothly, difficult through the air. The most beautiful person sang very touchingly. The rose petals of Sakura slowly floated in the wind. A guy turned to the Lord behind his back. He asked the main character if he had heard that the person on the stage was a male representative. Lord Lead also really looked at the most beautiful person with a mesmerized gaze. He said out loud that this man has just heavenly beauty. The guy asked if the young man was surprised. He added that the price of his ransom is 10,000 gold coins. At the same time, the guy winked at him. At this time, the people in the crowd began shouting to the man on the stage to sing at least one more song. He bowed to the dear guests and said that he was going to go to rest. The people in the crowd started asking provocative questions. Someone asked the singer that he was rumored to be a man, and then asked him to take off his clothes and show them. The most handsome man laughed and covered his laughing mouth with his hand. He apologized to the dear guests, saying that he could not fulfill their request in any way. He said with a big smile on the street that if they gave him some money, he would sing another song for them. At that moment, all the people began to throw gold coins all over the stage. All the money either fell on the wooden floor or fell directly into the most beautiful person. At this time, someone threw a bag of gold coins. The top knot immediately began to untie, so gold coins began to fall out. Picking up a bag of gold coins, he asked the crowd who this generous man was. The main character said that it was him and asked to sing a cheerful song for him personally. The most handsome man nodded his head and smiled sweetly while covering his blue eyes. He began to perform a merry song along with the dance, and Lord Lead smiled broadly with 33 teeth and clapped his hands loudly, as if supporting the singer. The guy still standing next to him whispered how much money he gave the singer, or rather how much was in the brown bag. The main character hastened to reply that it was none of his business. The guy said that it was not worth giving a lot of money and added that otherwise the main character would be treated in such a way as if he had special preferences. If he does not believe, then let him look around and look around. But when the main character did so, he realized that the crowd around him had dispersed. The stranger said that he hoped that the man on stage would be able to get rid of his terrible suffering. The main character has already looked at the interlocutor with interest and asked again. The handsome man was a servant of Lord Tank Heng, but rumor has it that he offended his master and was sent to a brothel for this in order to sell his smile. No one will pay 10,000 gold coins for a man. In the end, the young man said that he had to earn money a little in order to atone for his guilt. At this time, the dance of the most beautiful person came to an end. The man who stands on the stage bowed to his dear guests and folded his hands on his stomach. After a while, the main character was in his hotel room. It turns out that Lord Lead danced with Xiao Huang. The girl was wearing the same red dress. The main character praised Miss, saying that she did a good job, but the dance was a little insensitive, a little tough, so the girl brought a little love into it. Then Miss asked the main character that since he went to the river last night in order to see the most beautiful singer, is he handsome in his opinion? The main character honestly replied that the singer by the river looks much better than Xiao Huang. The girl immediately took a pillow and was about to throw it at the young man. The young man said that it was a little strange for an adult man to be dressed like that. Miss thought about it. She said that he is the most unhappy person. The girl sat down on the bed and began the story with the fact that the singer told the Lord that there were big problems on his land and that it needed to be reformed. The girl said that after that they put women's dresses on the singer and threw him into a brothel in order for him to sing like that. The main character asked about the fact that this guy is really stupid. Xiao Huang replied that his master lord was very kind to him, so the singer risked his life in order to tell the Lord. Lord Lead made a cute face with a big smile and said that the singer still looks very cute in women's clothes, which made Miss angry. After the main character remembered that he had to teach something else, they made a heart out of their palms and had to say out loud that they loved them. At the end, the young man blew a kiss while winking with one eye. He thanked all the imaginary juries. Xiao Huang did not repeat this movement in words anymore. The main character asked the girl that isn't it wonderful. She hurried away, and on the move threw up that she was sick of such actions and show-offs. Further events occur after a while. Lord Lead, wearing only a housecoat, strolled along the river embankment and thought about what was closed in this place today. But people were here anyway. Someone was sitting completely alone. Someone was together with his soulmate. At that moment, Lord Lead noticed someone familiar right at the water's edge on the shore, which is why he looked closely. The handsome singer was sitting there. They noticed Lord Lead and hurried to get up. The tall guy asked about the fact that the young man came here to meet Heiyu. The young man agreed with this. The tall guy informed the singer that he would not detain him then, and then said goodbye to Heiyu, saying that he was leaving. He agreed. The singer smiled sweetly and asked the main character that it was he who gave those gold coins last time. After that, he immediately thanked for it. Lord Lead smiled at each other and said that that amount was nonsense, especially since he deserved it. The singer sat back down on the grassy bank. The main character first of all asked about how many of the first ones had already accumulated out of all 10,000 gold coins. The singer replied without any emotion that only 100 gold coins for 3 whole years. The young man asked about the reformation. He asked me to stop talking about it. The singer put his head on his hands folded on his knees, softly with notes of sadness said that Tanchang would not last on its own for 3 years. The young man asked the singer if he still wanted to return. He replied that he really just misses it. Then he asked if he had heard of Yuxi city. The singer raised his head from his hands and knees and asked the main character that he was from the city of Yuxi. The young man nodded and asked if he had any recommendations for the city. He said that first the western city of Yuxi needs to take 10 other cities of Zhaochen, then move to the eastern lands and finally take Lingyun city. He continued that the cities border the territory of that young Lord Fangli, who is very suspicious, and Zhao Chen's 13th daughter helps him in everything. The singer said that if Lord Li could divide them, he would be able to absorb 10 Zhao Chen cities, and then Yunyang city, and then it could be considered the first victory. The main character smiled broadly and fixed his violet eyes on the water surface. The young man said he thought so too. The singer still continues to look at the young man. The singer took a thin stick in one hand and began to pick the ground next to his feet with it. He said softly that it was too late now. He said that the young man in front of him must be Lord Li. He reported that Bai Feng himself had just been here, the very first phoenix of the Yunhai auction. The singer straightened a strand of hair that had fallen on his beautiful face and said that he had also just given advice to Tom about Yunhai territory. The hero asked what he had said to him. The singer smiled and pointed his index finger at the main character, at the same time saying that he advised Bai Feng to kill Lord Lida. The events are transferred to a banquet with the lords of different lands and their children. Festive tables are packed with delicious, beautiful and appetizing food, which is beautifully served. A man tells his younger brother to eat more, because when he returns to his poor city of Yuxi, there he will have to eat pig food again. It turns out to be Lord Lida's older brother. He says with a grin to eat his fill, in order to immediately go home after that. After all, when will he taste such food again? His other 2 relatives also laugh and say that the main character will not be able to find this fresh soup of coral and dried silk in his ruined place. At this time, his sister appeared behind the main character, who first of all asked what the poor western city of Yuxi looked like. 2 more sisters approached him from the other side. One of them said that according to rumors they say that the city is very poor, and there are only savages there. After that, the girls in one voice began to ask stupid questions, like whether he has raw meat in his city, whether he has tasted demons. One of the relatives grabbed the main character by the cheek and pulled her away. Inwardly, Lord Li thought about how much they all irritated him. At this time, someone else came up from behind, but it turned out to be Yunai's second son. The tall guy asked everyone if they liked the food, while carefully looking at the young man. Bai Feng narrowed his eyes sweetly and asked the main character if they could talk. The main character cautiously looked at the tall guy with his purple eyes. Lord Li plunged headlong into his recent memories. He remembered how the singer said that he had given advice to Bai Feng about killing the main character. He said that Lord Li should definitely be one of those who will fight against Bai Feng for the Eternal Kingdom in the near future. The main character listened attentively. He added that once the protagonist dies in Yunhai, Bai Feng will be able to truly conquer the whole world with Yunhai's power after he inherits the throne. The main character said with full confidence in his voice that Bai Feng did not have the strength to kill him. After that, the young man asked Heiyu to tell him if he wanted to go with him to the western city of Yuxi. The singer was absolutely sure that the young man would ask him about it. The main character asked if the singer knew him well. He replied that it wasn't really that he knew the young man well, but that Bai Feng knew him well. He had known for a long time that the main character would come to him. From the moment the guy left the western city of Yuxi, he already understood everything perfectly, namely what Lord Li was thinking about. The singer said that it seemed to him that the first phoenix did not really take Lord Li seriously enough. Then he said that Bai Feng was actually missing something too. Lord Li hastened to ask with interest about what. The singer replied that it was health. Lord Li is now coming back to reality. The first phoenix says that he didn't have a chance to talk to the main character, so he offered to chat today. Behind Bai Feng were people of different genders, like a man, like women, of different ages, old people, teenagers, young people. Now the main character clearly understood exactly where he got and who he managed to run into. He had already clearly imagined his future in a boiling hell. He smiled like a real stupid fool and introduced himself as a simple village guy who is not at all worthy of the attention of such a person as the first phoenix of the auction. Bai Feng whispered to Lord Li not to worry about something, Then he would apologize for his sister. The main character asked in surprise about the girl, asking what she had done to him. There were other men standing next to the guys. The first one asked if the two had met before. The second replied that this could not be, this was his first visit. After a while, the guys were already at another banquet. Lord Tiancheng was sitting at a huge table, and his second son was sitting next to him. The eldest son was in the back. At this moment, one of the people who were standing behind Bai Feng began to draw his sword from its sheath, wanting to intercede for his master. The first phoenix said that it was not necessary. The main character noticed his father with 3 sisters. Lord Yuxi greeted Bai Feng and said that he had not seen him for a whole year, during which the guy became even much taller. Lord Lida's father approached the first phoenix. He asked that since they were no longer strangers to each other, how was his younger sister Bai Huang doing there? Bai Feng replies that the girl is still the same as always, noisy and creates problems wherever she goes, but his father believes that young people should behave this way. The king chuckled and said that he was probably right. He invited the tall guy to introduce his daughters. A second later, she seemed to pounce on Bai Feng and screamed that she had dreamed of seeing the young man in person all her life. They asked how he was doing and if he had a girlfriend. Further events take place that evening at sunset. Some children hang red lanterns, thereby decorating the embankment. The singer sees a frustrated Lord Lida, who looks sadly at the water surface and at the sun, which sets behind the mountains. The young man is sitting on wooden boxes at the very edge. The singer approaches Lord Lida and asks what the guy is thinking. Then he asks about the fact that he is not going to ask what he is doing here. The main character with a smile suggests that the singer could not resist when he saw a handsome man with a sad face sitting on the riverbank. The singer said that although the time spent with the young man was relatively short, he was still very happy. With tears in his eyes, he asked not to worry about him. Lord Lead picked up the papers while the singer was saying that this was a parting gift for him, and after that they would never meet again. The main character directly asked if the singer believes that he can get him out of this brothel. He replied that he did not have 10,000 gold coins. The main character looked straight into the singer's blue eyes and confidently said that Bai Feng would not pick him up, but he would pick him up personally. The singer said that he no longer wants to deal with the internal affairs of states at all. At this time, the young man took his cheek. The young man asks what he analyzes here every day, him with Bai Feng and Bai Feng with him. He always thinks about the internal affairs of states, even while singing. He clutched his face with his palms and said that every day he lives as if stuck in this woman's clothes. He sings this female song, and the people around him all the time ask to undress. The main character stroked the singer on the head and asked him not to worry, because he would no longer have to sing, since he would belong only to Lord Lead. He promised that he would take the singer out of the brothel no matter what. Even if an army of 100,000 people stood in front of him, he would still take the most beautiful person with him. The main character at this time put his arm around his new friend's shoulders and asked if it was not just a beauty contest. Further events are transferred to the beautiful and rich mansion of one of the Yunai lords. It was the middle of the night after the banquet. Bai Feng was asking someone sitting next to him about whether that person would go somewhere, apparently for a women's beauty contest. If someone asked Hey what it's like to wear women's clothes, the singer would say that he doesn't hate it. Then it is shown how a stranger approaches his maid and gives him a bag with a decent amount of gold coins. The singer, on the other hand, stands a little further away and looks at the unfolding picture. After that, the stranger approaches Heiyu and puts his hand on his back. The singer turns his head a little and looks at this man warily. It then narrates that if someone asked Heiyu what it was like to wear men's clothes, the singer would reply that he didn't hate it. What the singer said was to Lord Tiancheng's liking. The king came closer to the young man and with a wide smile on his face put the palms of both hands on his shoulders. Then it is shown how Lord Tiancheng got rich with huge sums of money, gold bars, gilded bracelets and jugs. The king arranged festive banquets and various events with his sons. There was a lot of food, a lot of alcohol, a lot of money, a lot of women and a lot of musicians. Meanwhile, in the city itself, which Lord Tiancheng owned, there was severe famine, poverty and devastation. Poor people died right on the roads, after which clouds of black carrion crows swirled above them. The singer watched the whole situation in his master's territory with tears in his eyes. He could not come to terms with this injustice and continue to watch how his lord leads a wild life, and ordinary people do not eat even crumbs of bread. One day, Heiyu came to Lord Tiancheng, sat down on his knees, raised his hands, and, bowing his head, began to ask the king for reforms. A man with blonde hair asked the singer about what he could offer him. The young man began to say that at the moment, Lord Tiancheng's 2 sons shared almost 2/3 of all the city's resources. He said that they should just share some of it with the people. At first, the king smiled contentedly and closed his eyes. He chuckled softly under his breath. And after that, Lord Tiancheng raised his right hand high up and swung it with all his might. The king with a serious expression gave Heiyu a savory slap in the face with a characteristic sound for this action. The singer swayed from her and flew off to the cold floor. Lord Tiancheng was hovering over the youth like a thundercloud and threateningly asked what he even dared to talk about. Because he was the ruler, and his beloved sons must be very rich and famous. The king loudly asked about who the young man thought he was in order to offer the Lord to give the wealth of his own sons to ordinary people. Heiyu, on the other hand, held onto his cheek that was burning from a strong blow with one hand and listened to what Lord Tiancheng continued to say with tears gathering in his eyes. He said that if the guy has free time, then he better go and find out how to get these assholes to stop causing them a lot of trouble. The singer sat at the feet of his master and tried to mumble again that if this continues on the territory of Tiancheng, he did not have time to say what he wanted. The young man was interrupted by a kick to the stomach. He doubled over in 3 deaths and flew even farther than he was. Lord Tiancheng sternly asked how dare the singer speak back. One of his sons stood next to the king, who turned to Heiyu and said to look at himself, and also that his father treats him too well. But instead of repaying him, he tries to take money out of his pocket. The king's son called the singer a wolf in sheep's clothing. Heiyu began to cough, and tears from his eyes were about to run down his face. He mumbled that he just wants to save the Tiancheng territory from destruction. Lord Tiancheng was about to leave with a pitiful expression when he heard his son keep telling Heiyu that he was just a servant, so he should stop singing his drama in this place. The king turned his head to the side and muttered under his breath that the word singing, taken out of the context of his son, reminded him of something. Apparently, Lord Tiancheng had some idea about the young man. Some time later, when Heiyu was sitting in the dungeon of the king's palace, one of the servants came to him and said that he would sing starting today. The young man from these words again began to gather tears in the corners of his eyes. That person said with a grin on his face that everyone in the palace was talking about Heiyu's reform theory. The servant turned around and headed for the exit, saying as he walked that they would see if even one person wanted to buy it. The man, closing the door behind him, added that then they would know how much people appreciated the singer's reform theories. After some time, Heiyu was already in women's dresses, but also behind bars. On the other side were crowds of curious people. In the guy's head, only thoughts were spinning about how much time had passed, as well as the fact that wearing clothes designed for women and singing sad songs every day is like living like a monkey in a zoo. But one day the blue eyes of the singer were filled with hope and faith. The young man then for the first time saw a stranger who interested him. This stranger was no one other than Bai Feng, who extended his hand to Heiyu. The singer thought that a tall guy should be able to pick him up from a brothel and a life sentence in prison. After that, some time later, the first phoenix stood on the embankment during sunset in the company of a singer. Bai Feng talked about how his sister Bai Huang met Lord Lid yesterday afternoon, and that Bai Huang has such a personality that she likes to fight injustice since childhood. The first phoenix said that her sister again disguised herself as an ordinary girl in order to lure street hooligans, but when she was about to beat them, Lord Lid came to her aid. Heiyu listened attentively to Bai Feng and looked at him, thinking to herself that Yuxi City was currently lacking in talent. The first phoenix added that if the main character did win the beauty contest, then he would definitely want to take the singer. Bai Feng turned his head and looked at the singer with purple eyes. He said that he did not want this to happen, and then asked if Heiyu understood what he was talking about. Heiyu turned away and, thinking, said that she understood everything perfectly. Further events returned to reality, namely the beauty contest. The host of the event loudly thanks the participant who performed last for the excellent performance. Heiyu spots Bai Feng with his sister. The host of the contest voices the next contestant, and it turns out to be Lord Union's 4th son, Lord Lid. The guy's eyebrows fly up at space speed, his eyes open wide and his mouth rounds. Bai Feng hears the news and turns around sharply, his cunning purple eyes flashing. The host of the beauty pageant voices the performed number that the main character will perform, and it turns out to be a pole dance. No one had ever heard of such a show before. Bai Huang also turns around like her older brother, with a wide smile on his face and wide red eyes. In the crowd in front of the stage was the father of the protagonist, Lord Union, in the company of his other 2 sons. The brothers' faces are full of shock, and the king is clearly unhappy with what is happening. The host of the competition loudly asks the guests present to greet Lord Lid with loud applause. At this moment, the main character appears in person. He curses and mumbles something unintelligible under his breath. The young man runs the fingers of one hand along his chin and lips. At this time, the red curtains on the stage are noisily thrown open and the main character appears in front of the guests, who is dressed in a pink women's dress under white stockings and holds a purple bow on his long flowing hair at the top of his head. The guy thinks to himself that he is a little embarrassed because of such attention. Lord Lead decides to perform himself on stage in front of all the lords in order to take part and then win in a beauty contest. The protagonist stands next to a metal pole and then grabs it with both legs. The young man loudly attracts the attention of the guests and addresses them. Lord Lead holds the pole with one hand and his waist with the other. The young man with a wide smile on his face and a perky voice asks those present if they are ready for the performance. The people standing in the crowd in front of the stage were a little embarrassed, so they opened their mouths. The protagonist grinned wickedly and put the index finger of one hand on his lower lip. The guy cryptically said that tonight he wants to hear a lot of applause and screams from the guests. After a couple of minutes, as Lord Lead began his number with a pole, the whole hall was already on its ears. Someone raised their hands up and shouted encouragingly. Someone just laughed. Even the brother of the protagonist laughed heartily. At that moment, someone from those present loudly slammed his palm on the table next to him. It turned out to be Lord Yunyang, who was in a violent rage. One of his sons, laughing, shouted to everyone around him to look at the stage, and also boasted that this crazy brother was his. The king clenched his jaw tightly and ordered his son to be quiet, because he was losing his face because of him. King Yunyang only thought to himself that he shouldn't have let his wicked son live. He firmly decided that he must secretly remove Lord Lead from this world of the living after all the guests had dispersed. At this moment, the Lord of Other Lands approached King Yunyang and said with a grin that he had a good son, Lid, whose name would soon spread throughout the Yunshan kingdom. He added that then the father would follow the son. At this time, someone sharply pulled the edge of the brown jacket of the second lord. It turned out to be his son, who smiled lovingly and said that he wanted to marry Lord Lead. The father goggled his eyes and loudly said that the main character is a male. Immediately, from behind the back of the second lord, the figure of King Union appeared, who, with a victorious smirk, asked if his own son wanted to marry his son. Lord Yunyang said he didn't really mind, but he wanted to both Lord Lead was son-in-law. The two men made eye contact that almost sent sparks flying. The second lord irritably asked what King Yunyang had just said and whether it was an insult. Meanwhile, Lord Lead was circling on a metal pole, wrapping his arms around it, then his legs. The protagonist smiled sweetly and looked with captivating purple eyes. His dress fluttered in the wind and in quick but fluid movements. All this time, Heiyu stood in the middle of the crowd and looked at Lord Lead with surprise. He looked rather sad, apparently a little upset because of what was happening. The protagonist noticed the bad mood of the singer and therefore sent him an air kiss while winking with one eye. Heiyu noticed this cute action, and then blossomed into a satisfied smile, still carefully looking at the young man on stage without looking away. Tears rolled down the face of the most beautiful man in a stream. Apparently this performance touched him, but in a positive way, as the guy was crying with a happy smile on his pale face. Bai Feng and his sister stood at the end of the crowd. The tall guy looked at Lord Lid with a bored look, while the pleased Bai Huan danced happily and joyfully. The girl waved her arms in different directions and laughed out loud. Behind the first phoenix, an old man appeared who always protected his master. He turned to the young lord and said that it was time to make a decision, as the level of Heiyu's talent would only increase over time. By the time Bai Feng uses the power of the Yunhai territory to conquer the whole world, Lord Lead will have already conquered Union, and this will be a big obstacle for them all. At this moment, Bai Huang loudly shouted at the old man with a bandage on his head and, pointing her finger at him, asked if he was trying to incite her brother to kill. The second phoenix confidently said that she did not agree with this, because Lord Lead was also her friend, and if the young man died in Yunhai City, then she would not be afraid and jump into the Tonghai River. After that, a girl with red eyes and rings in her ears took the first phoenix by the arm and asked him not to pay any attention to the old man and not to betray his words. Bai Huang asked her brother to take a better look at the stage with the main character, who she thought was very funny. The second phoenix asked in a kind tone of voice why Bai Feng and Lord Li just couldn't get along with each other. The girl invited the guys to become real friends. Meanwhile, the main character finished his number with the pole and stood up to the metal stick with his back close, hugging it a little from behind. The host of the beauty contest thanked the fourth son of Lord Union for the fact that the young man was able to show the guests such a hot dance. Lord Lead made a cute face with a smile while winking one eye again. The guy also thanked all the guests and said to those, so they don't forget to vote for him. Bai Huang continued to laugh out loud, saying that she couldn't stop laughing. She again added that the main character is a very funny person. Then she winked, and a single tear of laughter flowed from one red eye. The girl, in joy, asked her older brother why he did not invite Lord Lead here. She happily added that it would definitely be fun. Bai Feng didn't say anything, but only looked at his sister intently. At the end of the event, a poll was started among the guests about who will be the most beautiful person at the auction in Yunhai this year. The host talked about how sure that everyone here has their own candidate for this role, but she has no doubts about who will become the beauty queen. Among all the girls who stood along the stage, the people unanimously chose Lord Lid, the fourth son of King Yunyang. The guests began to congratulate the main character and clap their hands loudly. Someone in the crowd even shouted that after this, the young man can generally be called a son. Lord Lead pretended to be embarrassed, then sincerely thanked everyone and said that he loved absolutely everyone present. He waved one hand coquettishly and straightened his loose hair. The presenter continued to ask the main character questions about what it is like to be a beauty queen as a male, and even the fourth son of Lord Yunyang. The young man thoughtfully scratched his collections. Lord Lead winked again and said that he thanked his parents from the bottom of his heart for their kindness and upbringing. But most of all, he wanted to thank his older brother. The protagonist added that if he had not seen a young man in his mother's dress when he was only 8 years old, he would never have thought that men could dress up so beautifully. The brother was also in the crowd of guests, so when he heard the recognition of the younger, he spat out a drink that he did not have time to swallow. He shouted loudly at Lord Lead to stop spouting such utter nonsense. At that moment, all the people even left the elder brother of the protagonist, leaving him to stand alone in the center. At this time, the host said that she was finally inviting the main organizer of this beauty contest, Lord Yunhai, in order to award the winner. Lord Yunhai walked closer to the protagonist, and then they shook hands tightly. The man slowly and leisurely announced that, according to the rules of the beauty contest, Lord Lead had won this year, so the young man could choose any of the Yunhai auction lots. Lord Yunhai said that he was wondering if the youth already had something in mind, and then offered his help if not. The main character smiled and said that there was no need to help, because he already knew what he wanted. Lord Lead slowly turned his body towards the crowd of guests, raised one of his hands and pointed with his index finger at someone. The protagonist firmly stated that he had already decided, and then pointed with his finger at Heiyu, who was standing almost in the very center of the pandemonium of people. Lord Lead, dressed in a woman's dress, pointed his finger at Heiyu, who was standing in the crowd of guests, and said that he had already decided everything. Lord Lead squats at the very edge of the wooden stage and holds out his hand. Heiyu breaks off and rushes at the speed of light to meet the main character, while he loudly declares that this is his final choice. Heiyu runs to Lord Lead and holds out his hand to him. He grabs the singer and helps to climb onto the stage. Lord Yunhai, in turn, notifies the protagonist that, in fact, 12 cities of the Tiancheng territory are also up for auction. Lord Lead turns around at this suggestion and asks if it is true. Heiyu immediately becomes angry and calls the other young man a reptile. Lord Lead turned back immediately after that, laughed and said that he was just joking. The young man was very pleased and was in 7th heaven with happiness. Lord Lead added that, not to mention the 12 lands, he didn't want the entire territory of Tiancheng, as sooner or later he would conquer it all himself. At this statement, the young man grins rapaciously and victoriously. The young man once again turned to the man and said that by that time the entire territory of Tiancheng would be completely under his rule and not a single sinner would be forgiven by him. Lord Yunhai smiled unkindly with a sort of smirk and called out to the boy again. The man said that before Lord Lead could do that, he would have to wait a long time until they, the old people, were gone. Further events take place at the building of Cinnamon Bricks. A crowd of people crowded in front of him, anxiously discussing that Bai Feng himself had come here and now he was inside. In one of the spacious rooms of this brick building, there were people around the perimeter along the walls who were protecting Bai Feng. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more. The first phoenix himself extended one of his hands, in which he held a small cup of white porcelain. The tall guy said to someone that he heartily congratulated. Bai Feng brought the cup closer to his mouth and said that this time, not only himself, but also the people around him did not know everything. Lord Lead took a sip from his cup and said that he did not need the congratulations of the first phoenix. The youth simply asked to bring Bai Huang to this place because he wanted to talk to her. The first phoenix nodded and said that, of course, his little sister had done something wrong, but he, as her elder brother, was responsible for it. So Bai Feng decided to send a gift to Yuxi City as an apology. The protagonist finished his drink and said that if she learned how to deceive people at her young age, then who will she become in the future? Both guys were sitting at a coffee table in front of a panoramic window that spanned the entire wall of the room. Bai Feng turned to Lord Lid again and asked him what he thought about the current situation in the Yunshan kingdom. Then the first phoenix reached for a porcelain teapot and poured more hot tea for the protagonist. The tall guy continued to say that at the banquet, some said that the location of Yunhai territory is too remote, and it is inconvenient for other lords to get here, especially those who live in the north and east. Bai Feng added that on the way to Yunhai City, one might encounter various dangers during a long journey, such as the demonic race. He said that was why the dozen or so lords from the north and east did not appear in person at the annual auction this time. The first phoenix finally reported that one of these lords had said not long ago that it would be nice if next year's auction was held in the center of the Yunshan kingdom. Lord Lid, while saying this, was thinking that the territory of Yunhai was located in the southern and western parts of the entire kingdom. The protagonist again finished his tea in a cup and put the mug on a wooden coffee table with a sound characteristic of this action. The youth wanted to add something to Bai Feng's monologue. Lord Lid said that Yunhai City would fight to the very end in order to conquer a corner of the Yunshan kingdom and seize other territories. Bai Feng replied that his father's health gets worse every day, so obviously he won't take that kind of risk. The protagonist said that if Lord Yunhai didn't do it, then someone else would. His gaze grew sharper and he added that by then the power of the royal family would be useless and the entire Yunshan kingdom would fall into chaos with all parties fighting for their dominance. Lord Lid thought to himself why the first phoenix so easily said that his father was really ill. At this time, someone again began to pour tea into cups. Bai Feng first asked the young man what he was going to do. Then the first phoenix said that if that time came, they would become with him like ducks that would go with the flow. Both guys pulled their cups towards each other in order to clink them, and then drink. The first phoenix at the end asked if they could keep each other warm. The sound of a light blow of porcelain rang through the room. Lord Li was embarrassed and then asked about Bai Feng wanting to hug him. The young man said that it was already too much, although he wore a woman's dress once, but he had no hobbies in this regard. The first phoenix mumbled that he offered this as an example. The protagonist got up from his seat and walked towards the exit, saying as he walked that he was not like Bai Feng, so he suggested that he just forget it. The first phoenix said he didn't really have anything against the young man. Lord Lid abruptly stopped in place and slightly turned his head to the side, while flashing his bright purple eyes. The young man said firmly that he hated the first phoenix. The protagonist first asked about what Bai Feng has long known about Heiyu's talent, who sells his smile in a brothel. The young man continued to say that it doesn't matter whether it is about the battles in the Yunhai territories or about them. The singer knows absolutely everything about the first phoenix and even earlier advised him to kill Lord Lid. At the end, the guy asked the interlocutor about what about him. The young man said that in order not to spoil and sully his pure reputation, Bai Feng never thought of ransoming Heiyu, but simply thought that the singer would be easy to use for his own purposes, that's all. The first phoenix listened attentively with a stony expression, looking with bored eyes. Lord Lid at the end loudly shouted that the first phoenix is simply a real egoist, thinking only about himself and his own benefit. Bai Feng smiled thinly, closed his eyes, and asked about what the protagonist wanted him to apologize to the singer. Then the first phoenix asked the second question that Lord Lid wanted to hit him and then everything would be fine. At this moment, the main character was blown up from his seat and at breakneck speed found himself next to the first phoenix. He did not even have time to blink, as a huge fist of a young man appeared right in front of his nose. Lord Lid slapped Bai Feng in the face with all his might, causing him to open his mouth and fly back several good meters. While the first phoenix was flying, it demolished a large wooden table and chairs on its way. He landed right next to the full-length panoramic window, hitting his back against it. Now it became clear that Lord Lid had struck right on the nose, in connection with which the first phoenix bled from that place. A scarlet liquid trickled down her lips and chin in a thin stream. At this time, a purple-colored weapon with a silver tip flew out of the front door. It broke through the wooden surface and now flew straight at the main character. The spear was already a few centimeters away from the protagonist's pale face. The young man opened his purple eyes. Lord Lid tried to dodge, which saved his life, but wounded his cheek, leaving a deep scratch there. At this moment, Bai Feng, who was sitting with his back to the panoramic window in a battered state, loudly shouted at the man named Nails to stop. Apparently, the one who threw the spear through the wooden door at the main character was the protector of the first phoenix. The first phoenix said that the protagonist is really strong, since Nail's attack is not something that can be dodged so easily. Lord Lid, on the other hand, thought to himself that the accuracy of the 9th level was only one level below the human limit. The young man realized that if he had reacted even a millisecond slower, then this spear would have passed through his skull. Lord Lead helped Bai Feng to his feet, and he said that he was very sorry for his actions in the past, but from now on, the first Phoenix will sincerely cooperate with the main character. The young men shook hands firmly to conclude and strengthen their oral agreement. The first Phoenix smiled and said that in the end, when the whole kingdom of Yunshan is divided into exactly 3 parts, they must definitely have at least one of them. The protagonist thought to himself that Bai Feng was overconfident. Lord Lead smiled slyly and said that now he would then speak to the first Phoenix as the future ruler of Yunyang. Heiyu asks Lord Lead to listen to him and get up early to practice martial arts X, and then view all official documents. The singer says that although the protagonist signed a peace treaty with Bai Feng, he cannot be trusted in order not to be deceived. Heiyu adds that he knows Lord Lead's ideals, but no one can live in comfort forever, so if the protagonist wants to enjoy more in the future, then he will have to overcome the difficulty now. The singer continues to say, holding a lot of papers in his hands, that this is all the information that he kindly collected during all these years of confinement in a brothel about the 36 lords of the neighboring territories of the Yunshan kingdom. Heiyu handed these important papers to Lord Lead and asked him to look at them carefully. But the singer noticed that the main character was sitting on the floor in a lying position and dozing, so he loudly and demandingly asked not to sleep. The young man, through a not deep sleep, mumbled under his breath that everything is in order with him, since he now has Heiyu. The singer approached Lord Lead and hit the Tog on the head. Heiyu said that if Lord Lead continued to sleep like this and did not listen to the singer's recommendations and follow them properly, he would take all the gold coins, then run far away and leave the main character to sleep naked on the side of the forest. After that, the main character handed the singer small sheets of paper and asked him to pick them up. Heiyu widened his blue eyes and stared at Lord Lead intently. The main character began to explain that those people with whom Heiyu had sung before, Lord Lead bought them, as the singer wanted. These papers turned out to be their contracts in a brothel. Then Lord Lead asked, Heiyu plans to use them as a basis to support the Yuxi city government structure. Heiyu replied that she was going to because otherwise it would be difficult for him to manage Yuxi city alone, because there is not enough talent in that territory. And those people from the brothel have been with the singer for 3 years, and they are quite easy to use. The singer took the contracts of the people from the brothel in his hands and said with sadness in his voice that now they are all his personal people. Even if they did something bad before, he still doesn't want them to suffer anymore. The protagonist put his head on the fist of one hand, and the other twisted the dark curl of Heiyu around his index finger. The young man thoughtfully asked if he was finally going to change back into men's clothes. Heiyu came close to the main character and said that if he is ready to wear women's clothes, then he can change into men's clothes. At the same time, the singer tucked one strand of hair behind his ear, as is usually done in moments of flirting with a partner. The main character was very embarrassed and did not know what to do at all. Heiyu's face approached Lord Lead's face, and then leaned towards his ear and offered to change clothes right here, asking how about it. Further events are transferred to the western city of Yuxi, namely to the house of Lord Lead. The blonde Alia was already standing quietly at the construction site at the very entrance to the residence. The girl noticed a wooden cart approaching and heard someone calling her joyfully. The protagonist ran up to the blonde with all his might and hugged her tightly with all his might. Clinging to Alia, the youth began to tearfully complain to the girl that he had been taunted at the auction in Yunhai City while she was away from him. The protagonist said that starting today, he will also train day by day in order to achieve a speedy breakthrough in strength. Alia put her hand on the young man's head, stroked it, and said that she understood everything. The singer stepped closer, put his hands forward in a circle shape, and bowed in a respectful manner in greeting. He introduced himself as the one whom Lord Lead invited to manage all the internal affairs of the western city of Yuxi. Heiyu held out one hand for a handshake and asked the blonde, as a person in Lord Lead's entourage, to enlighten him properly about all the necessary information. Alia held out her hand in response, and she and the singer shook hands. The blonde firmly stated that if her young master trusted Heiyu, then she would trust too. The girl said to the new guest welcome, and he thanked for understanding. At this moment, the protagonist looked at the blonde carefully, then came closer to her, and taking her by the hand, asked who did this to her. The girl took her hand from the hands of the protagonist and pressed it to her. She mumbled that it was nothing to worry about. Lord Lead, on the other hand, bent down to the blonde's face as monocloser and with a serious expression on his face and an unhappy look once again asked about who dared to do this to her. The girl bowed her head, and a single tear flowed down her pale face. The blonde quietly said that they really couldn't defeat the people from the north. She added that if it were not for the double wall for protection that was built by the master earlier, the western city of Yuxi would have fallen long ago. Heiyu at the same time asked with interest if there were a young boy and a girl who was in a wheelchair among the people from the northern lands. The singer added that this same boy is the junior city lord of Zhaochen territory, and he does not cause any particular concern for him. But the girl who is always by his side is the most famous tactical genius, and if she brought here their soldiers, then it will be really very difficult to deal with them. Alia began to say that there was also a lot of pressure from the army in the eastern lands, combined with persecution and raids from the demonic race. The girl added that compared to Felida, who uses only strong magic every day, she is slightly injured. The protagonist immediately loudly asked the blonde that he didn't tell her to break the pendant that he specifically gave to the girl if something bad happened on this territory. Alia did not answer, but only lowered her head even more. The young man ordered her to rest and at least not practice with her sword for some time. At the end, Lord Lead added a request to take him to Felida. The blonde jerked her head up and her blue eyes widened. The main character did not understand such a change in the girl's mood. She called her young master by name, and the young man was already prepared to listen to the explanation. Alia took her eyes off to the side and carefully asked the protagonist not to go to the witch. Suddenly someone knocks on the door to the room. Felida sits there behind wooden boxes of various sizes. The witch turns her head to the sounds behind her and asks if Alia wants to come in. On the other side of the door, they respond positively to her. Felida rises to her feet and slowly walks to the front door. The witch opens it with a creak while lowering her eyes to the floor in shame. The girl in a quiet voice asks about what happened and what brought her here. At this moment, Felida nevertheless raises her eyes and takes a frightened step away. His bright yellow pupils constrict to small sizes. The witch abruptly began to close the door, but the protagonist prevented her. He put one foot forward, thereby blocking all possibilities. Felida takes a quick step to the side and stands outside the door. She yells loudly at her young master to come out. Then she began with tears in her eyes to beg the protagonist to just leave. The witch burst into tears. Bitter tears of shame and despair flowed down her face. The girl begged Lord Lead not to look at her, because she was ugly, a real monster. Felida moved away from the door at a decent distance, approximately to the same place where she sat alone 5 minutes ago. The girl hugged herself with both hands and quietly asked her young master not to hate her and not to leave her. Felida tearfully asked the young man not to touch her, because now she has become half a demon. But the main character did not listen to the words of the witch and at first extended one hand to her. Immediately after that, he tightly hugged the girl from behind, clasping her stomach with both hands. Lord Lead said in the girl's ear that everything was in order, because no matter who she became, he would never leave or leave her. The witch only opened her eyes to these words, because she did not expect such a reaction. The protagonist asked Felida to simply tell him what exactly happened while he was away from the western city of Yuxi. At that moment, something incredible happened, namely, the purple horns on the witch's head began to slowly decrease in size. The girl began to tell that the demons still attacked them from time to time, and she dealt with them as usual. This shows how the witch stands on top of the fortress to protect the city and uses her new purple staff. Felida continues to say that when the army of people from the northern lands came, they did not have worthy warriors or magicians, but their army orders changed very quickly. At the same time, it is shown how Alia fights enemies, standing on the ground near the fortress and using only a sword for this. The witch adds at the end that it seems to her that all those warriors are protected and her magic attacks with the staff cannot do much damage to them. At the same time, it is shown that there is a transparent dome above each enemy group, which acts as a shield. Felida says that she was afraid that she would not be able to hold them back and protect the western city of Yuxi on her own with the magic of her human side. The witch said that it was for this reason that she released her magical power of the demonic essence inside her, which was just waiting in the wings. The girl turned in the hands of the protagonist and stood facing him. Lord Lead now placed his palms on her thin shoulders and said that their enemy from the northern lands was indeed very cunning, so it was quite good that she and Alia could protect the western city of Yuxi. At this time, someone abruptly opened the front wooden door and ran noisily into a dark room. Both Lord Lead and Felida turned to look at the source of the noise. The protagonist immediately left the room and stumbled upon one of the Yuxi soldiers. The young man began to get very worried, sounding the alarm, and menacingly asked about what had happened. The warrior reported to Lord Lead that those scoundrels from the northern lands of Zhaocheng had again attacked their city. The guy in the company of a warrior went to the balcony of this building, and the servant said that in the absence of the city magician Felida, those people broke through a large crack in the northern wall to protect the city and now continue to attack them. The head of the purple-colored young men caught fire with anger and anxiety. He demanded that the warrior take him to the place of battle, that is, to where the army of the northern neighbors is now located. After some time, the main character was already standing on top of the fortress to protect himself from enemies, on which he already stood earlier. But during the battle with the demonic race, Lord Lead asked a young man with blue hair, whom he had previously appointed temporary commander of their warriors, to tell him about the situation. He folded one hand into a fist and covered the first with the palm of his second hand, and then began to report that out of all 81 people in their army, only 63 remained. The young man said that all the warrior brothers basically died in the battle for the defense of the fortress. The blue-haired boy shouted menacingly that some unfortunate woman sent these troops to block the exit from the western city of Yuxi and prevent them from taking the bodies of the dead warrior brothers in the defense. The protagonist put the palm of one of his hands on the shoulder of a tall young man with blue hair, patted him several times, and promised that sooner or later they would avenge this. After that, Lord Lead simply asked the guy not to worry so much. At this moment, the protagonist heard someone demanding in proud voice from the crowd of troops of people from the northern lands of Zhaocheng. This man was loudly asking if their city Lord Lead had still returned. The young man turned his head sharply, furrowing his thin eyebrows and narrowing his purple eyes. A man in the crowd asked a second question about where is the woman who used to throw a fireball at foreign warriors. He stated that the battlefield is somehow more crowded every day, because all the inhabitants of the western city of Yuxi are just a bunch of cowards. The man gave advice to hurry up and surrender as soon as possible, asking what was the point of protecting the city, which was so isolated from everyone. That person turned out to be a young boy who was the city lord of the Star City named Lai Fang, and next to him, Lord Zhaocheng's 13th daughter named Shifang was sitting in a wooden wheelchair. The young man said loudly that it would be very good if he also flattened this western city of Yuxi. After that, the boy leaned over to his sister and began to whisper something in her ear. The girl sat with a straight posture, closed eyes and hands folded at her feet. The protagonist, looking at them, thought about what Yan Fang told him, that his 13th sister is blind and cannot move her legs, so does she rely on the descriptions of people around her to get any information? The young man knows that the situation on the battlefield is changing rapidly, and the exact situation is required from the commanders. The protagonist thinks that if the situation escalates and becomes more chaotic, then how can a girl in a wheelchair listen to information from all sides at the same time with such accuracy? At this time, Lai Fang loudly asked if he was Lord Lead, who was the owner of the western city of Yuxi. The blind girl obviously asked the question not to the void, but to a certain person. The protagonist goggled his eyes in confusion. How could a blind girl know or understand that the city Lord Yuxi is on top of the fortress for protection? After a couple of seconds, cold sweat ran down the young man's face, and his eyes opened to the maximum size. Lord Lead saw how the whole huge army of the enemy raised their bows and aimed the steels at the young man. At the same time, Lai Fang extended one hand towards the sky. She, along with about her brother, was at the very beginning of her warriors. The blind girl sharply lowered her hand down and loudly with a cry gave the order to the soldiers to shoot the protagonist with a bow. Now, hundreds or even thousands of sharp arrows were right in front of the young man's eyes, a few good meters away. Lord Lead stood as if rooted to the spot, looking at his approaching death. Someone behind Lord Lead asks the young man to be careful, and the guy himself at this moment thinks only that this action is very ruthless on the part of enemies from the northern lands. At this moment, a blonde appears right in front of the main character, who covers her body in the power of her weapon of a young master. The girl even flew up in order to accurately deal with these arrows with the help of a blue sword while still in the air. As soon as Alia landed on the floor of the top of the fortress, she turned her head towards the protagonist and asked her master if he was okay. The boy, who is at the head of the army next to his sister, tells her that the woman with the sword, most likely, has already exhausted all her strength, but their people have some information support. The young man continues to say that as long as they continue to fight, this ruined western city of Yuxi will be destroyed today. He told the blind sister that she could not even doubt. The girl in the wheelchair raised her arms and made a rather unusual movement with them. This action proved to be a call for the army to act. The warriors at that moment stirred and began to prepare for something. After a couple of seconds, most of the entire army made a circle of warriors, in the center of which stood an archer, holding an arrow in his hand, the tip of which shone because of the sunlight. The people who stood along the perimeter of the circle were with their backs to the central person, while holding a shield in their hands. At that moment, the archer in the center of the circle fired his special arrow, the tip of which shone with a bright light. Alia noticed a sharp object late, which was directed towards the top of the fortress. The girl fell into a stupor for a couple of seconds, without doing anything. But suddenly, a man pulled the blonde by the shoulder, which was wearing metal armor, giving off a blue color. The man who saved Alia from certain death turned out to be the protagonist. He pulled the girl towards him, in connection with which a sharp arrow hit the edge of the wall of the brick fortress. The protagonist at that moment thought that this was beyond the scope of an ordinary bow with arrows, and that this arrow was clearly aimed at Alia, and not at Lord Lead. The young man suggested that the girl in the wheelchair was definitely afraid of something. Lord Lead wanted to test his assumption and loudly asked if they wanted him to give them another chance. The young man said that he would stand in this place with a pillar and asked if they could really kill him. To this he received an answer from the boy. He said that the main character dodged the steel, so he was just lucky. The boy told him to stand exactly where he was, if he was not a coward, and then ordered the warrior to shoot again. The girl in the wheelchair told her brother to calm down, and he got even angrier. The boy pointed his finger at Lord Lead and annoyedly asked how long they would fight this poor western city of Yuxi if they already had such a good chance now. The older sister thought to herself that Lord Yanyang had not formally severed ties with his son Lid, so if the father sent reinforcements in the form of his troops from the lands of the east, their army could be completely destroyed. The boy, all this time, tried to order the soldiers to shoot from the bow with all their arrows, but not a single soldier moved. No matter how hard the boy tried, nothing came of it. All the warriors completely ignored him, completely disobeying the orders of their young master. The army simply stood in pillars like stacks with a stone expression on their faces, not moving at all. Lord Lead, on the other hand, stood at the very edge of the top of the fortress and thought that, as it turned out, the boy named Fang Lai was not the commander of the army. At the same time, the young man laid his head on his hands, which lay on the width of the fortress wall. At this time, the boy ran up to his sister, took her hand and put it on his cheek. Fang Lai began to tearfully beg the elder, saying that she simply did not know how active this fat Fang Yuan was lately. And if this continued, then his dream of becoming the next lord of Zhao Cheng's territories would completely fail. The blind girl smiled a little and informed her brother, whom Ada called, that this western city of Yuxi would always be here and would not run away, so sooner or later she would let him enter it with a beautiful victory. After that, the elder sister patted her brother on the head and suggested that they let go of this situation for today. The boy was upset, looked at the girl with puppy eyes, but agreed. After a couple of seconds, the commander-in-chief of a platoon of enemy troops from the northern lands loudly ordered days. The front lines will change to the front line, and then step by step, retreat exactly 30 miles to the camp. And Fang Lai angrily shouted to the main character, which gives him a few more days to live. Lord Lead himself realized that this is still a very small child, completely obeying his older sister. A blonde and a guy with blue hair approached the main character from behind, and he kept thinking that after that incident at the auction in Yunhai City with the wearing of women's clothes, his father Yang Yang would sooner or later announce in public that he was cutting off all ties with Lord Lid. The young man realizes that at that moment, Fang Zhaocheng's 13th daughter, also known as Fang Shi, will not show kindness or any kind of mercy. The protagonist decides that he must strengthen the defense side of the western city of Yuxi as soon as possible in order to be able to withstand the next attack from enemies from the neighboring northern lands. Further events are moved to a place with the beautiful name the First Management Committee of the Western City of Yuxi. Right in front of the building hung a sign with this loud phrase. Seated at a large round table was the blonde Alia, who was now officially Lord Lead's bodyguard. The girl had the 5th level of swordsmanship. Also sitting there was the newly appointed temporary commander of the First Army of the Western City of Yuxi, a tall guy with blue hair named Luger. In addition to them, sitting at the table with the most sour face was a former singer named Heiyu, who was now the head of the Internal Affairs Department of the Western City of Yuxi. There was also a too-contented and smiling witch Felida, who was a magician of the Western City of Yuxi who had reached the 6th level of magic. A girl with snow-white hair was standing behind Lord Lead, who was also sitting at this committee meeting table. She hugged the young man very tightly from the back and smiled so widely that the smile stretched from one ear to the other. The main character did not really like it, so he asked the girl not to stand behind him, not to hug him, but to sit down in his place. Felida immediately jumped abruptly onto Lord Lead's knees, because of which the young man raised his voice at her and ordered her to get off his feet first, and then sit down on her own chair. Next to the huge round table stood a bespectacled servant with a piece of paper in his hand. He wrote down every word that the protagonist uttered from his mouth. Lord Lead turned to the man and told him not to write those sentences he had just said, and if he did, he ordered them to be crossed out. The main character was clearly pissed off, so it took him some short time to recover. The young man cleared his throat into the fist of one hand in order to normalize his voice. Lord Li began to say in a confident tone that the situation in the western city of Yuxi at the moment was not very good. So according to his own years of experience living in Yunyang territory, his father would never send his son reinforcements in the form of troops in his life. At that moment, he was interrupted by Heiyu, who said that sooner or later they would still have to move towards the eastern lands, so it would be very good to draw the border with Yunyang territory as soon as possible. The singer explained that then they would have an advantage, morally and in terms of public opinion. At this time, Alia asked about what they should do with people from the northern lands then, because the array that they installed is very strong, that even the magic of the 6th level from Felita will not be able to cause much damage to those. Heiyu said that, in fact, all strategists rely on 2 main strategies for lining up their troops. The first strategy is territorial defense, which uses the surrounding territory as its advantage in the battle with the enemy. The second strategy is the array, which is used to protect the troops of the army, but it is determined by the strategist's own personal ways. The singer said that Fang Lai currently holds 10 cities in his hands, but he thinks too highly of himself, and therefore people in these cities simply cannot earn a living. And also their army does not have any special territorial protection, and which is why they rely on Fang 13th's arrays to support themselves somehow. After that, the singer says that Fang the 13th was born such a daughter, with disabilities, and in this regard, her father, Lord Zhao Chen, did not want to see her at all, and therefore did not even bother to give her a name. It is for this reason that she is simply called the 13th daughter. Heiyu added that now Fang the 13th is helping her younger brother, because Fang Lai enjoys Lord Zhao Cheng's special favor and is the only person who wants to be near her. At the end, the singer confidently offered to raise an uprising. At this point, Heiyu asked the main character if he wasn't very good at kidnapping girls. Lord Li's eyes widened and he asked in horror. The singer did not wait for an answer, but immediately continued lied to say, as to how to start a rebellion, then let young Master Li let them think about it while he himself visits the demon race farm first. The main character immediately asked about what was wrong there, and Alia replied that something had happened on the farm with demons. The witch Felita stretched out her hands on the table and trembled all over, grimacing her face, so that a single tear flowed from one eye. Events continue on a farm for growing plants and flowers, as well as searching for precious ores by the demonic race. Monsters of green marsh color with ears like bats and short tusks at the mouth are very passionate and busy with their duties. Some of them carry wicker baskets on their backs, some work with tools like a sledgehammer. It is shown how green demons placed heavy bricks, which are made of stones and precious metal ores, on large bubbles of delicate blue color. In that place stands an elderly man of not tall stature with a bald head, on the top of which a pigtail is braided in a standing position. The old man turns out to be a Khan who guards this place and oversees the work of the demonic race. The man waves his hand vigorously and greets Lord Li loudly. The protagonist approaches the old man, and he points his finger at the stone mountain, in which there is a door made of wood, and says that right in that place is one of those things that the man wants to tell the young Lord Lead about. He asks to see it. Lord Lead passes along the road, on both sides of which large blue droplets are located along, like balls. When they approach the wooden door and begin to open it slightly, the main character asks what is there that the old man wants to show the young man. As soon as the guy looks inside, his purple eyes open wide. The protagonist calls out the name of what he sees in a loud enough voice, and it turns out to be colorless slime. It looks exactly the same as all the big blue droplets with 2 white dots in the middle. Lord Lead squats down and examines the drop. Khan says that the demonic race discovered the colorless slime during the schism. The old man goes on to say that he also asked the witch Felita a long time ago, and she said that among the thousands of low-level green-colored demons that she had ever encountered anywhere this year, she did not see a completely colorless slime. The protagonist picked up a stick from the ground and began to poke the colorless mucus with it, so he just did that. He made the sound phi. The young man asked the Khan if the drop had any unusual anomalies. The old man immediately said that this colorless slime is very cunning. Khan explained that from birth, this colorless slime hid in the corner, while not making a single sound and did not move. The old man went on to say that, one day, when he was distracted, the colorless slime tried to escape. He said that, luckily, that day, Miss Alia came to check on the demon race farm, saw the colorless slime escaping, and kicked it back to its place with all her might. It was then that the drop made its signature sound for the first time. Lord Lead asked about the fact that these spells, which hang around the perimeter of a small room on the walls, were installed by the witch Felita. The colorless mucus lay just like that, despite the fact that 2 white patches were stuck on top of it. The old man answered positively, saying that this colorless slime eats everything from the ground to the ceiling, even though it feeds on walls. Khan added that several farm animals were eaten by her and she always tried to escape, which is why the witch put the spell on her. Lord Lead looked at the large colorless slime in his hands and thought that it seemed to have some kind of intelligence. The old man continued to say that not only other slimes, but also other representatives of the demonic race have a natural dislike for her. The protagonist leaned closer to the colorless slime and angrily said that if she dared to escape at least once more, he would wrap her in breadcrumbs and throw her into a snake lair, namely, to visit the demonic race, which is her enemies. At these words, the colorless mucus shrank all over and seemed to be embarrassed. Lord Lead noticed a change in her behavior, so he asked if she understood his speech. The colorless slime at the same moment began to nod its white dots, which apparently were eyes. The protagonist once again asked with particular surprise whether the slime without color understands his words and just him. The colorless slime also made its signature phi sound. After that, Lord Lead threw a blue drop into the place where he took it from, and then asked the Khan if he had anything else that the old man wanted to tell the young master. The man nodded and said that a very rare race went on a hunger strike recently. Further events are transferred to some beautiful building in the city, which looks decent and rich. The protagonist goes inside it and, having reached the desired room, loudly opens the front door made of wood with a sound characteristic of this action. As soon as Lord Lead, in the company of a Khan with a bald head and a pigtail on top of his head, enters the room itself, the young man first of all asks how exactly the rare race robs in this place. Starkey does not answer the question, but says that the guy should see it for himself eyes. At the same moment, someone grabs the main character by the elbow with one hand, namely the left. This is exactly a female representative, which can be determined by the forms. On the other side of the body, another creature approaches the young man, who whispers into the main character's ear about why this guy was not brought here earlier, but only now. Then it says that isn't this the most suitable food for them, which can save them from hunger. They look exactly like normal humans, but have small purple horns on either side of their heads, elf-like ears, and pink bat-like wings. After a couple of seconds, a roar and blows are heard throughout the room. And now the main character is sitting in a royal chair, imposingly putting one leg, bent at the knee, on the thigh of the second. And those pink demons are now sitting tightly tied with a rope and each with a big bump on his head. Lord Lead asks the creatures that they are representatives of succubi. The pink girl nods in the affirmative and thinks to herself that in front of her sits the same Lord Lead, who recently defeated the Green Goblins. It turns out that her name is Charming, and she expected that the main character would be older when she returned. The young man puts a cup of white porcelain on the table and states that the Khan told him that these two pink creatures went on a hunger strike. Charm and her relative are still sitting on their knees a few meters in front of the young Mr. Lid. A pink guy named Magic, who is a male succubus, opens his eyes wide and replies that they feed on human energy, and male energy is the highest and best quality. Then Magic closes his eyes, from one of which a bitter tear flies, sighs and says that except for one very strange uncle with a bald head, there is no one in this place. The protagonist listened attentively to the words of the succubi, then thought deeply, because of which he began to scratch his chin. Then an idea came into Lord Lead's head, like a light bulb lit up in the darkness. The young man began to offer an idea, but in the middle of a sentence he was cut off by both representatives of a rare race. Both Magic and Charming both unanimously answered that it was impossible and drooped all over. Both succubi looked down at the floor, turned away from each other a little and sighed sadly again. Lord Lead said that the two of them were absorbing energy through dreams, and then wondered if they needed direct contact with their target, like physical touch or something like that. Magic replied that they had a very difficult time with all this. He elaborated that they must reach their goal and the other side must see them. Magic went on to say that when their eyes meet and they make eye contact, the succubi use their powers to send a signal to another person. At the end, the pink guy said that when the night is quiet, they use dreams as a means of squeezing energy out of a sleeping person. Here the main character asked if there were any restrictions in the form of a victim. Charm said that if the target is a very powerful person, then they can be killed right in this dream, and if this happens, they will also die in reality. The pink girl said that's why they usually target teenage boys who have very little power, but are full of masculine energy. At that moment, Lord Lead mumbled under his breath a description of a potential victim, namely an energetic teenage boy. A great plan came to the guy's head, and he firmly announced that in this case he had an ideal candidate for them for this role. The protagonist began to smile slyly, thinking to himself that he is such a smart person. At that moment, Heiyu appeared behind him and called the youth's name loudly and demandingly. The singer approached the youth closely and asked if Lord Lid had any connection with Bai Feng. Lord Lid turned Heiyu's head and said no, since after the announcement in his western city of Yuxi, he never contacted him again. The singer furrowed his brows and asked loudly and angrily why the guards from Yunhai City said they wanted to see the main character. The young man stared at Heiyu in bewilderment, not understanding anything at all. Events continue in front of the brick gates to the western city of Yuxi, which serve as a defensive wall against enemy raids. In that place is a whole squad of warriors in armor, 2 of which are holding a huge wooden chest. This whole thing is led by a guy in a long white raincoat. Lord Lid stands on top of this fortress and looks down at the guards from Yunhai City. The youth loudly asks the chief if Bai Feng sent him, and then added to just know that the boy did not steal anything, remembering to himself that he took hand towels, bath towels, and soap from his hotel for 3 days. The main white cloak guy introduces himself as the 6th level guard captain of Yunhai City named Hiji. He says that they came to the gates of the western city of Yuxi on the orders of the young master Ba Feng, in order to fulfill the promise he had made earlier, that is, to bring a gift as an apology for the vile lie of his younger sister Bai Huang. At this moment, the protagonist remembers the words of the first phoenix and thinks about taking those words as what Bai Feng said in jest. After that, Lord Lid ordered the servants to immediately open the gates of the western city of Yuxi. A couple of minutes later, the soldiers, along with the head of the guard named Hiji, were already entering the city, carrying a huge box made of wood with them. The guards placed the chest right at the feet of the protagonist while he asked Hiji about what exactly Bai Feng had sent. The head of the guard handed Lord Lid a gold-colored key and said that he would know what it was as soon as he opened this box. The young man thought to himself that it was interesting. What was in it? Lord Lid suggested that the huge chest contained a large amount of gold. He thought that if there was money there, then there must definitely be several hundred of them. The protagonist went to a wooden box and inserted a golden key into the keyhole. He thought that there could be all sorts of valuable things lying there, such as blood jade coral or old dragon beard wine. As soon as Lord Lid spun the key several times, Bai Huang jumped out of the chest, stretching her arms to the sky and loudly shouting the word surprise while repeating it several times. The girl was dressed all the same as at the auction, in an expensive pink dress, and with a lot of all sorts of exquisite jewelry and precious stones. Lord Lid opened his mouth wide in horror, while Bai Huang sharply excused the joyful look of crimson eyes on the angry one. The girl with resentment in her voice asked the guy why he did not open this wooden box for so long, because she almost had time to suffocate from lack of oxygen. The protagonist immediately ran up to Alia and hid behind her back, looking out from time to time. This action made Bai Huan even more angry that she screamed loudly that she had come here to have fun with the youth, and Lord Lid did not even greet her properly. The second phoenix called this behavior of the protagonist very rude and offensive. Lord Lid first asked how Bai Huang could fit into such a small box. On this, the girl rested her fists of both hands on the sides at the very waist, grinned and said that he was not at all small, but very spacious. The second phoenix smiled broadly again and jumped into the wooden chest, saying out loud that she crouched like this, and there was still enough space left. At that moment, the protagonist flew up behind the chest and abruptly slammed the lid of the wooden box. It turns out that he fraudulently managed to reseat the girl with red eyes in the place in which she arrived here. Bai Huang began to shout loudly and beat from the inside, asking how dare he deceive her just now, and then ordering him to immediately open the box quickly or otherwise empty does not blame her for what happens after the youth does not listen to her words. The protagonist turned his head to the head of the guard and said that he did not want such a gift, so he asked to send the wooden chest back to Yunhai territory, because the western impoverished city of Yuxi is too poor and bad for such great gifts. Hiji replied that young Master Bai Feng had said that he himself would be personally responsible for all of Miss Bai Huang's expenses, and that the first phoenix did so sincerely. The head of the guard said that he had put a whole dozen of Yunhai territory's most valuable treasures in the bottom of the wooden box, and it was rumored that they could be sold for tens of thousands of gold coins with great ease. Lord Lid abruptly jumped off the wooden chest and flung open the lid. Bai Feng stared at the young man with joy in her red eyes. The protagonist grabbed the girl in his arms and threw the same one to hell like a thing. Immediately after that, Lord Lid, with eyes sparkling with happiness and a contented expression, bowed his head to look into the wooden box. But as soon as the main character looked there, the smile and happy expression were erased, as if they had never been there. The bottom of the wooden chest was completely empty. There was absolutely nothing in it from the word. The young man turned around sharply and angrily asked where the jewels that the head of the guard Hiji was talking about were. Instead of the head of the guard named Hiji, it was Bai Feng who was dancing in one place, jingling her diamond bracelets and expensive jewelry. The girl winked at the young man with one eye and asked if this was what he was looking for. The second phoenix then stated that her older brother had said that her living expenses had nothing to do with Lord Lead. The main character almost fell off what he heard. Lord Lead immediately took off and ran towards the girl with red eyes, loudly asking to give the jewelry to him, as they will keep them like the apple of their eye and return them to her when she finally grows up. Bai Feng, on the other hand, laughed out loud and ran away from the young man, as if playing cat and mouse with him or chasing. The other three of Lord Lead's subordinates stood a little way off and watched the unfolding scene. The blonde Alia asked Heiyu about who this girl was and who she was. The singer, on the other hand, turned his back on the main character, and replied with an evil expression that it was Bai Huang and she was the youngest daughter of Lord Yunhai. Felita just stood and watched the whole circus. Bai Feng was holding Lord Lid's cheek with one hand, while holding the decoration as high and as far as possible with the other hand. Finally angry, Heiyu barked loudly for the two to quickly approach him. The singer began to talk about how he recently learned that a lot of people are wandering in the western part of Yuxi City, and they open their underground game house and hold large-scale martial competitions there. Heiyu said he was therefore planning to set up a special patrol group known as guards. At the same time, the guy raised the index finger of one hand to the sky, and then the singer took Bai Wang's hand, which shocked the second phoenix, and said that the position of general instructor is very suitable for this girl who used to punish villains and hooligans in her homeland, and also promote goodness there. Right after that, Heiyu asked Lord Lid about what the main character himself thought about this, while smiling contentedly, like Bai Huan. The singer added that the second phoenix already has guards from Yunai City here to properly support her in this. Lord Lead, of course, was embarrassed, but agreed with his comrade. And after that, Heiyu asked Alia and Felita to take Bai Huan and the guards of Yunai City along with the head, to walk around the western city of Yuxi. After that, the protagonist turned his head towards the singer and asked suspiciously if he was really planning to leave the second phoenix with them. Heiyu decided to explain her decision to Lord Lid and said that Bai Huang would remain in the western city of Yuxi as a good deterrent for other forces. Moreover, the identity of the second phoenix of the auction from the famous city of Yunhai would scare away many enemies, namely those who are plotting some kind of then a plot to trample on the western city of Yuxi. Heiyu thought that their enemies would not dare to attack this city, if only because the daughter of the most famous lord in the entire continent named Yunhai was staying in it at the moment. Heiyu closed his eyes and his face contorted in a martyred grimace of pain. He furrowed his brows and said that it was most likely that Bai Feng, that is, the first phoenix of the auction, had sent his little sister Bai Huang to the western city. The singer said that something must have happened in Yunai City, so Bai Feng decided that it would be better and much safer for his beloved little sister to hang out with the main character in the poor town of Yuxi in the content west. Further events of the story begin to occur after some not a small time. It was a bright, fresh, sunny morning outside, and there was almost no cloud in the sky itself. All the shady forests of the Yuxi City area, high overgrown mountains, and many other things were illuminated by the sun's rays, from which brilliant reflections emanated. Events take place in the main character's house, namely in his personal residence as the owner of the western city of Yuxi. The young man rested quietly in his private room. At that moment, a blonde named Alia abruptly flung open the front wooden door to the bedroom. The girl shouted at the top of her voice to Lord Lead to wake up immediately and get out of his bed, and said that the Fan 13th Army was attacking again. Lord Lead groaned in martyrdom and said with sadness in his voice that this time the advance of the enemies from the north was much fiercer than any in the past, because it was still too early in the day for wars and attacks. The guy was still sitting on a white spacious bed, slightly wrapped in a thick blanket.